Chapter 206. Byung-hong had once placed all the scenes of that battle between the divine in Chun Changsheng's mind. The language of the Sacred Light Continent was rather similar to dragon language. When he was a child, he had memorized the last volume of the Taoist recital in Xining Village's old temple. He had learned from his master how to pronounce those words. In the cave beneath New North Bridge, he had learned dragon language from the little black dragon for a very long time. The demon lord could understand the angel's language, and he could understand some of it as well. Although it was not very precise, he knew that the angel's words were not the meaning of the stealer of fire. The meaning of those words, or those syllables, was probably descendant of light, or inheritor of light. What did this mean? Chun Changsheng did not understand. The change in the angel's eyes, that callous, stern, and terrifying expression, did not seem to be an attitude toward him. It seemed more like a form of wariness. Suddenly, the angel appeared outside the rain of swords. There was no sound, no movement. It seemed like it had not moved, but it was no longer where it had been standing. This was a rather bizarre sight that made one shiver in fear. It was like it could completely disregard the supreme laws of the world. The angel looked at Chun Changsheng and raised the spear of light in its hand. Chun Changsheng stood in front of the blind zither player. The zither player sensed what he wanted to do. The wind ruffled his white hair. The blind zither player's fingers rested on the zither strings. The cold and mournful zither music resounded once more, concealing an immense unwillingness. If not for the sneak attack of his sect master, he would probably have already stepped into the divine domain. Even if he was still no match for this angel, he would still be able to fight it head-on. Truly unwilling. But so what? The zither music suddenly grew louder, all its unwillingness transforming into a will to fight that slashed at the angel outside the sword array. Agitated by the zither music, the several hundred sword in the night sky buzzed and began to vibrate so quickly that it became impossible to see with the naked eye. The howling winds blew the yellow sand on the ground, but they could not get past 1 foot. The 1 foot above the ground was filled with zither music and sword intent. The blind zither player burned all his true essence to unleash his strongest attack. At this moment, the intent of the South Stream Temple sword array was pushed to its limit. The angel paid no attention to it, and it made no attempt to dodge. It continued to stand at its original spot, calmly watching Chun Changsheng. The sound of the zither and the sword had disappeared. Chun Changsheng and the blind zither player had been staring at the angel this entire time, confirming that it had done nothing. Even if this angel possessed an unimaginably perfect divine body, how could it not leave behind a single mark? Could it be that the sky full of sword wills and zither music did not fall on him? How'd he do it? Chun Changsheng suddenly saw a stream of light in the depths of the night. The stream of light was very faint, like the ashes of a bonfire that had burned for an entire night. However, that streak of light was rather clear, and it clearly carried some sort of order, or rather, direction. He thought of a possibility, and his expression changed slightly. Could it be that the moment the sword intents and zither notes descended, the angel had retreated into the darkness, and then returned to the battlefield? Just like when he came to the arena from the gate of the courtyard. How could an otherworldly expert who possessed such unimaginable speed be defeated? The angel calmly gazed at Chun Changsheng within the sword array, its eyes once more changing. This change was very slow, but it had a grandiose feel to it. It was like the ocean had become a mulberry field. The sea of stars had become a tomb of light. The harshness, callousness, and terror returned to indifference. But this indifference was tinged with something indescribable. Chun Changsheng felt a little cold as he gazed into the angel's eyes. It was not because of fear, but the effect that fear from many years ago had left on his soul. When he was 10, he had heard the mad roars of many monsters from that solitary mountain in the cloud grave. Senior Yurun had been fanning him by his bed, occasionally turning his head to look at the distant mountain. Chun Changsheng remembered clearly that every time his senior brother turned his head, his eyes would have this sort of emotion. The angel raised its spear of light and stabbed at the rain of swords. The swords naturally reacted. The sword array flowed like a cloud, tightly sealing off the entire world. With a boom, the yellow sand on the ground leapt up, breaking through the gap of 1 foot. It seemed like the entire ground of the courtyard had risen. It also seemed like Qin Changsheng and the blind zither players' bodies had sunk into the ground. What was beneath the ground? The abyss or the godly might prison? The howling winds were cut to pieces by the zither notes. The blind zither player lowered his head, his hands wildly dancing on the zither strings. The wound on his left shoulder burst open and blood madly danced. Qin Changsheng's spiritual sense was connected to the sword array, and his face instantly paled. The spear of light stopped outside the rain of swords. But in the next moment, deep within the rain of swords, a sharp and bright spear point suddenly emerged from the void. Seeing the bright spear point right in front of him, Qin Changsheng finally understood that his South Stream Temple sword array could not truly block the angel's attack. It was a light clap. The strings of the zither snapped, curling up like the whiskers of a water-swallowing dragon, tightly binding themselves to the spear point. The blind zither player's 10 fingers on the strings were instantly shattered by the terrifying strength of the strings, causing blood to spurt out. Qin Changsheng raised his sword to meet it. With a light clap, the middle of the vault sheath blocked the spear point. And then there was a grinding sound that made one's teeth ache. This was not the sound of the spear point grinding against the vault sheath. This was the sound of his bones trembling, incessantly echoing through his body. Apart from being bright, the tip of the spear that emerged from the void did not seem to have anything special about it. Only Qin Changsheng and the blind zither player could sense the weight it bore. This weight could no longer be described as a mountain or river. This weight was the world. This was the might of the world. How could humans endure it? Qin Changsheng had a void imperfection body that had undergone a perfect purification, and he had even soaked in the blood of a true dragon. In terms of the toughness of his body, he could be considered a rare existence in the world. But he could not endure the power of the spear point. He was on the verge of collapse, on the verge of death. The swords were connected to his mind, so they could sense the danger he was in, but they could not help him. They had to block the spear of light in the angel's hands, so they had to endure even greater pressure. The wind and rain were slightly disordered. The South Stream Temple sword array was also somewhat disordered, if not for the fact that the angel seemed somewhat wary of some of Qin Changsheng's methods. The sword array might have already been pierced through by the tyrannical spear of light. Even so, Qin Changsheng and the blind zither player could not hold on for much longer. The demon lord calmly watched this sight. He did not say farewell to His Holiness the Pope in accordance with the aesthetics of Shualao City, because he knew that Qin Changsheng still had tricks up his sleeve, whether it was the Garden of Zhou, the Green Leaf World, or something else. Until all these tricks were used, he was confident that Qin Changsheng would not die. To be continued. Chapter 207. Qin Changsheng did not enter the Green Leaf World, nor did he enter the Garden of Zhou. He was not sure if the angel could see through the laws of space like the demon lord had. Until the last moment, he would not make such a choice. So in this perilous situation, what should he do? He did something unexpected. He closed his eyes. This was not disdain, nor was it surrender. This only represented his focus and his attempt to find a way out of this situation. The angel's figure was outside the rain of swords, its spear of light thrusting at him. He knew that this was not the real scene. In this real scene, which could not be determined by sight, the angel had been moving this entire time. One moment, it was in the depths of the darkness. The next moment, it was at the weakest point of the sword array, and then it was back to its original position. In this extremely short period of time, the angel had launched countless attacks at the sword array in the night sky. But it was too fast, like a lightless lightning bolt. It was impossible to sense its movements with the naked eye. Qin Changsheng's eyes also could not keep up with its speed, so he could only rely on the sword array to block and sense. In this situation, it was simply impossible to determine the angel's position. Thus, the methods he had prepared for this angel, those heavenly tome monoliths transformed into stone pearls, naturally could not touch its body. This being the case, he simply closed his eyes, no longer attempting to use his eyes to track its movements. Instead, he spread out his spiritual sense. The spiritual sense he spread out into the darkness was like a net. He still could not determine the angel's position, but he could already clearly sense the traces it left behind as it moved through the net of spiritual sense. The rays of light that were perfectly straight, yet could suddenly turn, were so eye-catching. Chen Changsheng closed his eyes and slightly lowered his head, both hands gripping his sword. He waited for those traces to gradually show some sort of pattern, or perhaps slow down a little. The blind zither player guessed at what he wanted to do. He slightly tilted his head, the broken zither strings trembling along with his bloody fingers drifting out of the sword array. They were like countless thin snakes in the air, attempting to block those rays of light and slow down the angel. Alas, there was an insurmountable gap in their cultivation levels. The angel indifferently stood outside the rain of swords, countless rays of light flickering and then extinguishing. No matter how serene and powerful Chen Changsheng's spiritual sense was, it could not truly bind it. And the zither player's zither strings could not catch up to its figure. In battle, he was the true light and lightning. The spears of light endlessly stabbed at the south stream temple sword array. Chen Changsheng's face gradually paled. His sea of consciousness was shaken. He had already suffered a serious internal injury. However, he still didn't give up, because it was obvious that the power transmitted by each spear of light was much weaker. The reason why his power was reduced was because he wanted to pursue the pinnacle of speed. The angel had chosen very carefully. He was cautious because he was vigilant. This also meant that Chen Changsheng's response was reasonable, but it was still a pity. Unfortunately, the content was the same as before. The difference in their cultivation levels was too great. Hundreds of rays of light flickered in and out of the night sky, like stars blinking behind a thin layer of clouds. In this brief span of time, the angel's spear of light had stabbed at the rain of swords 400 sometimes. At the same time, the spear tip that had traversed through the void and arrived in front of Chen Changsheng, which was blocked by his sword horizontally, advanced toward his eyes by more than half a foot. Countless swords were sent flying, letting out angry, unwilling, and helpless cries. The spear of light seemed slow, but it was actually unstoppable as it broke through the depths of the rain of swords. It looked like a great river bursting out of a mountain. It was also like a beautiful light bursting out of the clouds. The South Stream Temple sword array was about to break. Chen Changsheng and the blind zither player were about to die. Suddenly, an even more beautiful light appeared in the darkness. It was a flame from ancient times that seemed capable of burning all things. Even the darkness and the light of the sacred light angels could become its fuel. Soon after, a sword glow like the Milky Way reflected in everyone's eyes. If the angel's spear of light was a great river bursting out of a mountain, then this sword glow was the Milky Way descending from the sky. The calm surface of the water reflected the golden flame, shining with countless dazzling rays of light. Countless sparks suddenly appeared in the night sky and then flowed down to the ground. If one looked carefully, one could see that these sparks formed a straight line when joined together. A battle was progressing at a speed that the naked eye could not follow. These sparks were the marks left behind by this battle. Outside the rain of swords, the angel's figure vanished. The spear tip in front of Chen Changsheng also vanished. The countless sparks in the night sky were like fireworks, so beautiful that they moved the soul. What truly moved the soul was that this proved that the angel had been forced to reveal its true position and then began to fight. Who did that sword glow imbued with boundless light belong to? What sort of flame could ignite the darkness? And who on the continent could keep up with the angel's speed? Chen Changsheng did not need to analyze this. In truth, the moment he sensed that light, he knew all the answers. That light was so bright that even the angel's figure seemed somewhat dim, and that spear of light had become a metal rod. Only one sword style in the world could shine with such light. Only Chen Changsheng had ever truly seen this sword style. This was the true, strongest sword style of South Stream Temple, perhaps even the strongest sword style of the entire continent. The Sword of Great Light. The only person that could use the Sword of Great Light was Su Yurong. Only she possessed a speed not inferior to the angel, possessed the true flame of the heavenly phoenix that could burn the darkness. Of the experts below the divine domain, only she could force the angel to reveal its true form. Xiao could not, Xiao Zhang could not, Liang Wangsun could, but the blind zither player could not. From this, Su Yurong truly lived up to the name of the heavenly phoenix. Her appearance had abruptly changed the situation, but it was still not enough to alter the final result. The Sword of Great Light truly was ridiculously powerful, but it was still unable to surmount the gap between cultivation levels. Not everyone could be like Wang Pe, comprehending the blade for 10-some days under the ginkgo tree and then cleaving open the world with a single slash of his blade on the Luo River. An indescribable pressure descended from the sky, like a real mountain. The angel might not have been able to break the Sword of Great Light, but it could use the laws of the world to suppress it. The light suddenly became much dimmer. The yellow sand madly danced, the fierce winds howled, and the terrifying chi of energy seemed almost tangible. In the sandstorm, one could faintly make out a white-clothed girl drifting backward, like a white flower leaving a branch. At this crucial moment, Chun Chang Sheng still had his eyes closed. His spiritual sense had been following the angel this entire time. Countless complicated lines gradually filled the picture, transforming it into a lake. The entire courtyard was in this lake. When Su Yurong's Sword of Great Light descended, he sensed it. He sensed the position of the angel. All the snowy plains began to burn. All his true essence was madly poured out. A moment ago, he was in the rain of swords. A moment later, he was in front of the angel. Then, he thrust his sword forward. To be continued. Chapter 208. When the tip of the spear thrust out of the void, Chan Changsheng had raised his sword to block, using the stupid sword. From the moment he had decided to kill the demon lord to the darkness in the courtyard, and now that he had finally arrived before the angel, he had used the intellectual sword. So for this final attack, he had naturally used the blazing sword. These were the 3 swords that Su Li had passed down to him in the wilderness. The angel's expression changed at the sight of the sword glow, and then it raised its left hand. It had apparently not expected Chun Changsheng's speed to suddenly increase so much, his true essence also much stronger. With a light clap, Chun Changsheng's sword was caught between the angel's fingers. It could no longer move, just like a clamped mosquito. The stainless sword possessed a peerless sharpness, but it was tightly caught, unable to cut through the angel's fingers. This was probably Chun Changsheng's strongest attack, but it posed no threat to the angel. Logically speaking, the angel should have used its crushing stance to attack Chun Changsheng. For some reason, a hint of fear appeared in the depths of its eyes. Su Li might be on the Sacred Light Continent right now. Or had he seen this attack before? Or had he sensed something else? Chun Changsheng did not notice the change in the angel's mood. He continued to burn his true essence and press forward. The stainless sword did not advance a single inch. The fear in the depths of the angel's eyes transformed into rage, and its 2 fingers twisted. The stainless sword bent like a rainbow, but it did not break. An unimaginably enormous power passed through the sword to Chun Changsheng's hand. With a light clatter, countless cracks appeared on his wrist, ready to break at any moment. Chun Changsheng did not care. The 3 swords that Su Li had taught him on the wilderness were not his true killing moves. These 3 swords were methods to help him reach the angel. The 5 stone pearls formed from the heavenly tome monoliths on the hilt began to rapidly revolve, traveling along the sword toward the angel's face. The angel immediately sensed that something was wrong. In the air between it and Chun Changsheng, the laws of the world were undergoing a transformation. Just what sort of object could alter the laws of the world in such a small area? The angel's face suddenly became abnormally pale, almost translucent, like glass. Countless rays of light emitted from his body and shot out in all directions. If it was an ordinary cultivator of this continent, then so long as they came into contact with these rays of light that carried boundless might, then they might be incinerated on the spot. Chun Changsheng wouldn't. His body was also filled with this kind of light, perhaps even more and purer. The angel immediately released its finger and began to retreat into the darkness. With a clang, the stainless sword bounced back, its razor-sharp edge cutting through space, but it did not touch the angel's body. The string of stone pearls formed from the heavenly tome monoliths shot along the sword, but they also failed to land on the angel's body. Several streams of light illuminated Chun Changsheng's eyes, the marks left behind by the flapping of the angel's wings. With the angel's speed, as long as it retreated, he would find it very difficult to catch up, much less find a chance to engage in close combat. At that time, he would only be able to watch the spear of light from afar and enter a truly desperate situation. Chun Changsheng didn't panic, nor did he despair, because the heavenly tome monoliths transforming into stone pearls was not his last resort. With a light clack, the stainless sword separated from the vault's sheath. Chun Changsheng gripped the front of the sheath and swung it at the darkness. This action was very similar to when Luo swung the falling rain whip, and also very similar to sprinkling water. Countless sword glows surged out of the sheath like a river of stars, faintly emitting the roar of a dragon. The wings of light on the angel's back incessantly flapped. Countless collisions resounded through the night sky. It was clearly a clash between a sword and a wing of light, but there was the sound of metal striking stone, abnormally clear and bright. Sparks flew in all directions in the night sky like fireworks. It was even more beautiful than the sky, full of fireworks earlier. The slashes of countless swords could not leave a single mark on those two wings of light, so they naturally could not injure the angel's divine body. Those sword glows scattered like fireflies, no longer able to stop the angel from leaving the range of the heavenly tome monoliths. Even at this time, Chun Changsheng's eyes remained very calm. The heavenly tome monoliths were not his last resort, nor was his reign of swords. His last sword was not in his sheath, nor was it in his hand. That sword came from somewhere else. It was not his sword. It was her sword. Su Yurong returned from the darkness. The great light returned. The temple sword flew through the air and slashed at the angel. Chun Changsheng extended his right hand through the string of stone pearls and gripped the hilt of his sword in the darkness. He once more used the blazing sword to slash at the angel. Both Su Yurong's sword and his sword exuded boundless light and heat. The two sword glows met in the darkness and then fused into one. They grew even brighter, like the sea of stars had descended upon the mortal world. The sword intents of the two swords fused, becoming incomparably powerful and divine and dignified. In the deepest depths of this divine and dignified was a somber killing intent that had come out of nowhere. This somber killing intent appeared abruptly, and then became boundlessly majestic. From the sandy ground to the sky divided by light and darkness, everything instantly became extremely dry. Before these two sword glows, the entire world seemed on the verge of burning. The angel's eyes suddenly turned very deep and serene. It did not retreat. It raised the spear of light. It could sense very clearly that these two sword glows that could burn the world could not be avoided by relying on speed. They could only be met head-on. When Chun Changsheng and Su Yurong's sword glows met, the demon lord also sensed something, an expression of extreme shock appearing on his face. Without hesitation, he summoned all his powerful demon artifacts and laid down many arrays around him. An unimaginable might appeared between the heavens and the earth. Countless terrifying waves of chi scattered in every direction. Fierce winds howled and sand filled the sky. The blind zither player had been sent flying into the darkness. The darkness had been melted by the two sword glows and their destructive chi, so thin that it seemed like it could shatter at any moment. This courtyard was located by a stream not far from the Xiang clan estate. Outside one of the walls was a cliff. Several hundred extremely thin stone pillars had appeared on the cliff. They looked like stone swords, exuding a faint and awe-inspiring aura. No one knew when these sword-like pillars had appeared or how they had appeared. It was a very mystical sight. The sandstorm gradually calmed, and the darkness became extremely faint. Light once more fell upon the courtyard, illuminating the scene. Su Yurong's face was as beautiful as a painting, her expression calm and focused. It was impossible to tell if she was injured or not, but a few clumps of fire were burning on the sand behind her, probably phoenix blood. Chen Changxing's face was very pale. The hand holding his sword was trembling, the web between his thumb and forefinger bleeding. His injuries were probably very severe. Across from him, the angel stood in the sand, its right hand gripping the spear of light, its wings lightly floating in the wind, its expression indifferent. A few bloodstains could be seen on the sand, as well as a broken white feather. It was obvious that it had also been injured, and not lightly. Then this was enough. The angel had actually been injured? No matter how talented Chen Changsheng and Su Yurong were, they had still not been able to cross that threshold. Before Wang Pa had slashed with his blade in the Luo River, he had not been able to wound Tai Shu. How had they done it? The demon lord was stunned by this sight, thinking, is this the harmonious combination of two swords? To be continued. Chapter 209. Under the command of military advisor Blackrobe, Shualao City's intelligence network was extremely efficient. The events of South Stream Temple's closing ceremony had long ago been recorded in extremely detailed dossiers. The dossiers even included the painting of a painter from the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets who had defected. The Demon Lord had personally seen this painting, seen those two dazzling sword glows, but he still believed that the descriptions in the dossiers were too exaggerated. Only today, when he saw these two sword glows with his own eyes, did he realize that reality was even more exaggerated than the descriptions in the dossiers. The angel calmly gazed at Chen Changsheng and Su Yurong. Golden blood slowly dripped down from its broken white wings. Its expression was still indifferent, but its eyes had already turned serious. It had not expected that these two young humans would be able to block a full-powered attack from its spear of light. What truly made it wary were Chen Changsheng and Su Yurong's sword intents. Those two fused sword intents were still not enough to defeat it, but there was something hidden within that made it feel an unprecedented unease. It made it even more uneasy than the string of stone pearls on Chen Changsheng's wrist. Just what was that dry and cold chi that rose from the yellow sand to the sky, that aura that seemed capable of destroying all things? The angel possessed unimaginably vast knowledge, because it had lived for an extremely long time and also possessed the eye of the saint bestowed upon it by God. Thus it could foresee the terrifying aspects of those stone pearls, even recognized Chen Changsheng's 3 attacks, see through the sword slashes, and directly break them. But it did not know what that aura revealed when Chen Changsheng and Su Yurong's swords joined together was. That aura was destruction, originating from the long-lost Having Blade style. To be more precise, it was burning the world. The Having Blade style was Zhou Dufu's supreme technique. Chen Changsheng and Su Yurong's swords joined together originated from the Having Blade style they had cultivated in the Mausoleum of Zhou and the Mausoleum of Books. When their sword glows descended, they naturally carried some of the powerful will that Zhou Dufu had used to oppose the entire world, even daring to destroy it. In the face of this will and qi, even experts of the divine from the other continent would feel fear. Zhou Dufu was the supreme expert beneath the starry sky. Both the central continent and the sacred light continent were beneath the starry sky. The angel took in a deep breath. With this breath, the air around the entire courtyard began to dance wildly. His naked chest and abdomen rose slowly before falling back down. The sounds of wind and thunder could be vaguely heard. He raised a spear of light and aimed it at Chen Changsheng and Su Yurong. Fear stemmed from the fact that his long life was threatened, and this would stimulate his endless desire to kill. This was the instinct of life, even if he was a servant of God. The angel had decided to kill Chen Changsheng and Su Yurong, using its strongest move, even if it would worsen its injuries. He could not allow these two young humans to continue growing. Chun Chang Sheng could feel the terrifying pressure coming from the spear of light, even from a distance of several tens of feet. He did not intend to retreat, because the angel was simply too fast. Even if Su Yurong could keep up, he could not. He raised his left hand and aimed at the spear of light. The stone bead, which had already returned to his wrist, began to spin, emitting popping sounds. This voice sounded very soft, but in fact, it contained the power of countless years. The thousand-some sword glows scattered through the night sky pierced through the air and quietly hovered around him and Su Yurong. The South Stream Temple sword array had been completed once more, and with the heavenly tone monoliths as its foundation, Qin Changxing was confident that he could resist the angel's attack, at least for a few moments. As long as he could buy a few moments, he and Su Yurong could attack. He was confident that Su Yurong understood his meaning, but out of the corner of his eye, he saw that she did not move and lightly shook her head. They could not continue fighting here, or else too many people would die. The priests outside the courtyard were not protected by the Li Palace's grand array, so they would assuredly be jolted to death by the shockwaves of the battle. And how many demi-human civilians in White Emperor's City would die? Qin Changxing glanced at her and knew what she was thinking. He had no objection to this. "Let's go," Qin Changxing said. Su Yurong extended her left hand and grabbed his collar. He was much taller than Su Yurong, but she effortlessly grabbed him. She seemed very practiced, as if she had done this many times before. It was a loud bang. Yellow sand madly danced, and cold winds blew. White wings would occasionally appear and then vanish. Su Yurong and Chun Changxing left. A hole was punched through the clouds in the night sky. The Li Palace's grand array very naturally opened a path. The angel in the night sky that was resisting the Li Palace's grand array was also too late to stop it. Golden blood no longer dripped, but the white severed feathers were striking on the ground. The angel raised its head to the sky, confusion in its eyes. It did not understand why these two young humans had chosen this method of battle. As a servant of God, it was innately capable of using the laws of the world. Even the fastest expert on the continent could not surpass him in terms of speed. Confusion only lasted for a moment. Countless rays of light illuminated the night sky. Another hole appeared in the night sky. The wings flapped in the wind. The answer also drifted in the wind. The angel transformed into a stream of water and began to pursue that place. The courtyard returned to silence. The demon lord walked out of the darkness and raised his head to look at the clouds in the night sky, at the two holes in the clouds that were slowly closing. "I'm truly jealous," he sighed. "I want nothing more than for your hair to turn white in one night, but I also don't want you to grow old. What should I do?" Only half of the courtyard was shrouded in darkness. Not far from the ground, it was bathed in the clear and bright light. All of White Emperor City could see the abnormality in the sky. These were two dazzling lines of fire. At the front of these two lines of fire, one could faintly make out the flapping of pure white wings. The demi-human civilians were so shocked by this sight that they were speechless. Some of them believed that they had seen a god and began to kowtow. The two lines of fire seemed to be moving slowly, but they were actually extending with incredible speed, chasing each other. In a few seconds, the two lines of fire had entered the higher clouds. The clouds exuded boundless light, as if they were on the verge of burning. The frigid winds buffeted against one's face at high speeds like icy blades. The flapping of the wings compressed the air with unimaginable speed, causing thunderous booms. Su Yurong brought Chun Changsheng into the sky, into the depths of the clouds. All around them was a vast expanse of white. Without experience, it was very easy to lose one's sense of direction, and one might even crash into the hard earth. Su Yurong naturally did not have this problem. Qin Changsheng had many experiences riding cranes, so he was also very calm. Perhaps because the air was gradually thinning, or perhaps because the clouds were thickening, the surroundings suddenly grew quiet. Qin Changsheng turned to Su Yurong. The sunlight pierced through the thick clouds, scattering into gentle rays of light that fell on her face. It was an indescribably beautiful sight. The beauty here did not refer to the world of light and shadow. It referred to her picturesque face and the crystalline beads of sweat at her temples. Chen Changsheng suddenly asked, "Do you often fly with someone?" Su Yurong glanced at him, confused as to why he was asking this question. To be continued. Chapter 210. In such a tense moment, one should talk about what to do next and where to go. Even if one knew that he was going to die and wanted to leave some powerful last words, one should often start with a review of one's life. Just like what happened on that night, when Chen Changsheng was trapped in the Tong Palace by Mou and encountered the Black Dragon. Therefore, Su Yurong didn't understand what was wrong with Chen Changsheng. If it was an ordinary girl, she might have been annoyed and turned her face away with a cold snort. But she was not an ordinary girl. She was a girl who, despite being a holy maiden in waiting, still had to go to town every 10 odd days to play mahjong. Moreover, she was not afraid of killing a lecherous gambling den owner with a single strike of her sword. Moreover, there was nothing to do in the clouds right now. Although the angel of sacred light was terrifying, it had yet to catch up. "I'll fly you over. When you returned to the capital last time, you didn't bring Shuang along to try. I'm not a scarlet goose or a flying chariot." Su Yurong's tone was still very calm, but Chen Changsheng could tell that she was starting to get impatient. He explained, "I just think you're very skilled." Su Yurong said, "I've said it before, I'll bring you flying." Of course, Chen Changsheng wouldn't forget. Back in the Garden of Zhou, he had been chased by Nank's twin wings. He had traveled from the bottom of the lake all the way to the pond on the outskirts of the plains of the unsetting sun. When he broke through the water, he was already unconscious. She was the one who told him what happened after that. At that time, she had jumped down from Sunset Valley. Her divine soul had awakened once more, and a pair of phoenix wings had sprouted from her back. Was that how she grabbed him and flew away? Chen Changsheng still felt a little awkward. Any man who was held in the hands of his fiancée would probably feel the same way. Moreover, she had only grabbed it once. Why was her technique so proficient? Could it be that she practiced often? What was she practicing for? Su Yurong looked at his expression and knew what he was thinking. She smiled and said, "Later on, when you were unconscious, I carried you many times." This referred to what would happen after entering the plains of the unsetting sun. At that time, she was heavily injured and Chen Changsheng was unconscious. If she wanted to take him away, what else could she do besides carrying him? Although he was carrying it and not flying it, it was still the same thing. Chen Changsheng also understood and said regretfully, "I always carried you on my back." Su Yurong said, "You are taller than me. How can I carry you?" Chen Changsheng thought it was reasonable, but then he felt it was unreasonable. "I'm taller than you, so it's not convenient for me to carry you. Does that mean it's convenient for me to carry you?" He thought about it for a long time and felt that he could only hold his belt. This scene was rather unbearable, so he fell silent. Su Yurong asked, "Your last resort is the heavenly tome monoliths?" Chen Changsheng said, "No, it's you." When he gave this answer, there was no hesitation. He did not even think about it. These are the most romantic words. He was acting like a playboy. Su Yurong knew he wasn't. His answer was not words of love, but the truth. But she still blushed, because her last resort was also him. This was not the truth of love, this feeling of being a match made in heaven. It really made people feel a little shy. She suddenly thought of a question and asked, "You knew I was coming?" There were many details about the battle in the courtyard. From Chen Changsheng's response, he should have been waiting for her to attack. On the day Chusu was driven away, a few things happened and my mind was in a mess, so I didn't think. Chen Changsheng continued. Later on, when I was burying Senior Bianghong and Wuqiong Bai, I saw the traces of fire in the rocks and guessed that you were coming. Su Yurong asked, "So you were waiting for me to appear?" Chen Changsheng replied, "Since you were in White Emperor City, when I couldn't hold on any longer, you would naturally appear." This was the truth, not words of love. Su Yurong's face grew even redder. In order to conceal her embarrassment and the heat on her cheeks that not even the cold winds could cool, she decided to criticize him. "Then you should have told me your plan first. It wouldn't have been so dangerous." Chun Chongsheng knew that in terms of calculation, he was far inferior to her. If she had been the one to carry out today's plan, the outcome would have been even better. At least they would not have been forced to leave the ground and be pursued by that terrifying angel of sacred light. The problem was, since she did not want to appear for some reason, how could he tell her his plan? Could it be like that year, when he and Tang 36 stood under the great banyan tree and shouted to the entire capital? Su Yurong replied, "It doesn't matter if I know or not, but there's someone who should know ahead of time." Chun Chongsheng did not understand who she was speaking of. In this complex and incomparably dangerous situation, was there anyone more important than her, more worthy of trust? Just when he was prepared to ask his question, the surrounding environment suddenly changed. The clouds in front of them suddenly became extremely viscous, almost like quicksand. The speed of the two became much slower. A hint of wariness appeared in Su Yurong's eyes. Without hesitation, Chun Chongsheng waved his left hand. Countless swords flew through the air, slashing at the increasingly viscous clouds. Sword intents incessantly cut at the clouds, cleaving out a relatively weak path in front of the pair. Su Yurong also moved. The true flames of the heavenly phoenix emerged from her pure white wings, burning the clouds and making them sizzle. With a whoosh, they charged through the thick clouds. The clouds broke. The sun rose. The sun in the sky did not seem to have any color like it did from the ground. It was pure white, exuding boundless light. The clouds were also white, reflecting the white light. Even the blue sky was dyed white. As far as the eye could see, all the pair could see was a vast expanse of whiteness. The blazing light was very dazzling. Several dozen li to the west was a very small black dot. In their eyes, the small black dot quickly enlarged and turned into a figure. Dressed in a deep blue palace gown, Madame Mu stood on the clouds, her hands held behind her. Su Yurong fell silent as she gazed at this graceful and graceful saint. She had not expected that while the White Emperor had returned from the Starfall Mountains, Madame Mu would come here. Moreover, Madame Mu made her recall the woman she most admired in her life. She clearly knew that the situation was still under her control, but she still felt an intense unease. Chun Chongsheng did not know everything, but he was actually somewhat calmer. She is not her. Only Su Yurong understood what he meant. Chun Chongsheng was not intimidated by Madame Mu's bearing. He did not feel that Madame Mu was very similar to the Tianhai Divine Empress. The current world's evaluation of the Tianhai Divine Empress could be said to be mixed, and it was probably the same in the future history books. But there was one thing that no one dared to deny, not even his teacher Shang Xingzhou. She had a broad mind. This was not about being benevolent, not about being merciful, but about having a broad mind. The Tianhai Divine Empress had the world in her heart. Whether she wanted the world to prosper or perish, her gaze had always been on the world. Madame Mu was of noble birth and possessed an extremely high status. She dared to ally with the demons, even collude with the other continents. But her gaze had always been on the present. But this did not mean that she was not strong enough. At the very least, Chun Chongsheng and Su Yurong were no match for her. Even when the two swords joined together, it was the same. The clouds moved again, a bulge appearing and then bursting open like a flower. The angel broke through the clouds. To be continued. Chapter 211. In the end, Su Yurong and Chun Chongsheng had still been delayed by the suddenly thickening clouds, unable to throw off the angel. Although they had never thought about throwing it off at the start, after seeing Madame Mu, this became their only choice. The angel sensed Madame Mu's presence and turned, its indifferent eyes subtly shifting. Even it had to admit that Madame Mu was powerful. Madame Mu slowly arched her brows at the angel. She could clearly sense that this angel of the sacred light had grown even stronger. Because it had descended for a longer period of time, was it gradually getting used to the laws and principles of this world? In the next moment, she sensed a familiar scent in the divine qi exuded by the angel. Only now did she understand that the demon lord had insisted on attending the origin returning ceremony for this reason. Madame Mu was several dozen li away in the west. The angel was several li away in the east. No matter how one looked at it, this situation could not be resolved. Not even Yang Hong's resurrection could break it. Wang Pe and the Mount Li sword sect master could not cross 10,000 li to arrive. Not even experts of the divine domain could completely ignore spatial distance. So who could resolve this problem? Chen Changsheng said, "It seems like there really is a problem with my plan." Su Yurong said, "It's just a little troublesome, no problem." Chen Changsheng said, "I'm worried that the White Emperor will not act." Su Yurong said, "Since he has seen all living beings, he must act." Chen Changsheng did not understand. In the end, they are husband and wife. Su Yurong said, "That's because you don't know who their original target was." Chen Changsheng still did not understand. Even if the White Emperor acts, it might not succeed. Su Yurong said, "It's still the same thing. Since he has seen all living beings, he will definitely succeed." Chen Changsheng still did not understand. But the angel's spear of light had already arrived. The dazzling sunlight seemed to be swallowed up by the terrifying might of the spear. The sky suddenly darkened, and the clouds seemed to turn gray. Light descended once more, bringing with it the purest and most dignified chi from the temple sword. Pure white wings drew out streaks of light in the sky. Countless swords followed and protected it, like a waterfall that could freely turn and turn. It was an abnormally magnificent and beautiful sight. Amidst the rain of swords, a sword will suddenly rose up and entered the great light. The light did not become brighter, but it seemed to have become a tangible existence, just like the layer of clouds from before, extremely viscous. The angel's body suddenly slowed. Note, 2 sword lights. One fell. It had an indescribably exquisite trajectory and indescribable sword momentum. Once again, it clashed with the light spear that carried boundless might. The sun in the sky suddenly dimmed countless times. Clouds rolled up by the fierce wind covered the entire area, and within a radius of more than 10 miles, there were goose feather-like clouds drifting everywhere. An invisible giant bell split open between heaven and earth, shooting out countless sound waves and air arrows. The scattered clouds in the sky gradually dispersed, and the sky became clear again. The angel remained in its original position, while Su Yurong and Chen Changsheng had retreated several li. In the gradually calming chaotic clouds, one could see burning phoenix blood, shattered sword glows, and a broken feather that was whiter than the clouds. Just like in the courtyard, the angel had been injured once more, and Su Yurong and Chen Changsheng's injuries were even more severe. The harmonious sword art born from the having blade style and the South Stream temple sword array truly did possess a power that surpassed cultivation levels. Thus, it had been able to directly contend against Wuqian Bai, but it was still not enough to defeat an expert of another world like the angel. But no one felt that Chen Changsheng and Su Yurong were very weak. At their current age and cultivation level, it was already extremely difficult to imagine that they could injure an angel. Just like the angel, Madame Mu also saw even more problems in these 2 sword glows, a hint of surprise appearing in her eyes. The goose feather-like clouds stilled, a clear ravine appearing in the sea of clouds, an extremely small hole there. Su Yurong and Chen Changsheng had vanished, flying down the hole into the clouds. A line of fire appeared in the sky. The clouds were thrown into disorder as the angel pursued. Below the clouds were the mountains on the other side of the Red River. Madame Mu was well aware of this. When she thought of the world's scorching chi in those 2 sword glows and the wildfire of the celestial trees in the mountains, the surprise in her eyes deepened. She thought that this was Su Yurong's strategy and felt a faint admiration for the Sanus's calculation ability. Then, she felt a faint sense of mockery and pity. But she was not prepared to wait for Su Yurong to realize her mistake, because that person had already returned to White Emperor City. Her blue palace gown drifted in the wind, her sleeves stirring up a cool breeze. The sea of clouds fiercely leaped like cotton. Each leap signified the compression and struggle of the clouds in a radius of several hundred jong. The clouds gradually parted, gathering in various places, gradually splitting into countless islands. These islands were constantly compressing inward, an unimaginable energy filling every tiny space within. No matter where Chun Changsheng and Su Yurong were hiding in the clouds, they could no longer escape. The clouds continued to collapse inward, all the mist particles and the gradually condensing water droplets attracting each other, creating a terrifying weight. Even the rays of the sun seemed to slightly deform as they passed by the edges of the clouds. If these clouds continued to collapse, both Su Yurong's heavenly phoenix bloodline and Chun Changsheng's immaculate body would ultimately be crushed to death. This was the rumored gathering of the most powerful techniques of the great Western continent's imperial clan. This was the divine technique of the saint. Countless clouds continued to compress, their shapes still unable to settle, transforming into all sorts of shapes. Some clouds were like the pirates of the great Western continent. Some clouds were like grand Tungas. Some clouds were like tigers. The blue palace gown no longer danced. Her sleeves gradually grew still. Madame Mu calmly gazed at the cloud. The cloud calmly gazed at her from the gradually dispersing sea of clouds. It was like a tiger calmly gazing at her from the gradually flattening grassland. The cloud was white. The grassland was also white, like it had been smeared with frost. It was a white tiger. Note, suddenly, I had a thought and wrote this word in that sentence. Then, I was stunned to realize that this was the first time in my 10-some years of writing that I had used this word. For someone like me, who has always had a poor vocabulary, this is something to be proud of. Thus, I casually looked it up and was stunned to realize that what I had always been reading was wrong. I had always been reading swearin. Then I thought of the past. How few there were would forever be written as how few there were, until it was painfully pointed out by a reader. I have already forgotten the name of this reader, but every time I think of it, I am filled with boundless gratitude. I have never been good in this aspect, and I am not serious, so I often make mistakes. 10 years ago, I was ridiculed many times by my superiors. In this chapter, there are clouds that look like pirates and clouds that look like grand scholars. I basically write about them once in every book, just like the words pretending to be lonely and imitating despair. Of course, I'm not a literary youth. This is just my way of determining coordinates. Now that I think about it, I really haven't read much after the age of 26. I had originally planned to start reading War and Peace in October. This was the truth, but I've been as busy as a dog this year, so I'll think about it later. But I still recommend that everyone read more. Read the books that you want to read. Finally, today's chapter has a very good title. To be continued. Chapter 2:12. Not long ago, the White Emperor had returned to his city. Then, he had returned to the imperial city. But Madame Mu was not present. As he gazed at the cold and deserted observation platform and the quiet stone hall, the White Emperor raised his brows. A raised brow did not mean surprise or surprise. It could also mean some sort of interesting emotion. The White Emperor walked to the stone railing and caressed the cold sensation that he had not touched for several years. He gazed down at the cracked Whale Fall platform, completely different from how it had been several years ago. With a calm expression, he recalled certain things, calculated certain things. There are very few things in the world that could surprise him. Everyone believed that he was in a hurry to find his wife and take back his imperial city, and his country. But this was not the case, so he was not in a hurry to find his wife. Instead, he stood by the railing and calmly waited. He was waiting for the consequences of those events that had already occurred. He was waiting for something that he wanted to see happen. He calmly gazed at the rivers and mountains, at the world, and then his gaze fell on the courtyard in the western part of the city. The darkness and light over the courtyard were not conspicuous in the real world. So how could he not see them? But this was not enough. Even though the angel in the ball of light in the darkness was becoming clearer, it was still not enough. Soon after, he heard the sound of a zither, heard the cry of a sword, and saw that stone statue slowly opening its eyes in the darkness. The White Emperor's brows rose in interest, gradually beginning to exude killing intent, though he did not know who this killing intent was directed at. The Pope and the Holy Maiden could allow him to see all living beings, so they could naturally allow the other races to appear before all living beings. Two lines of fire tore through the darkness, broke through the Li Palace's grand array, and flew into the sky. Everyone in White Emperor City saw this sight. Emperor Ba was also watching this scene quietly. His gaze slowly followed the two lines of fire up, ultimately resting on the clouds at the very top. He did not look at the place where the two lines of fire had sunk into the clouds, but several dozen li away. That place was in the west. Even if it was only several dozen li, it was still slightly to the west. The White Emperor felt somewhat sorrowful. When the tiger-like cloud appeared in the sky, Madame Mu stopped moving. The sea of clouds returned to normal. Su Yurong and Chun Changsheng descended into the mountains on the other side of the Red River. The angel transformed into a line of fire and followed. Madame Mu ignored them, only quietly gazed at the white cloud. Chun Changsheng and Su Yurong will still die, but I don't think you care too much about this, because it has nothing to do with you. No matter how much the cloud resembled a tiger, it was still just a cloud. Naturally, it would not answer. No one knew who she was talking to. You've always liked to hide behind the scenes and let others fight in front of you. You only appear when you feel that it's time to pick the fruit. Madame Mu mocked. As husband and wife, how could I not know what you were thinking? How could I let you use me? The white cloud that resembled a tiger was gradually dispersing. Madame Mu's expression returned to indifference. Countless gusts of wind sounded in the mountains. The gigantic celestial tree swayed in the wind, and the branches at the top broke and fell like a torrential downpour. From time to time, cracking sounds could be heard from the depths of the incomparably thick tree trunk. It sounded exceptionally terrifying. The priests and guards of the celestial tree temple turned pale with fright when they saw this scene, and they began to yell everywhere. Two streams of light pierced through the branches of the celestial tree, stirring up countless flames and scattering sparks. If not for the fact that the celestial tree's nourishment had always been the underground wildfire, it might have already been set ablaze. As the celestial tree swayed, the scorching chi of the wildfire rose from the branches and leaves into the sky, evaporating a massive hole in the clouds. With a loud bang, the two streams of light finally met and separated. Over a dozen thick branches were broken, and two figures crashed heavily into the trunk of the celestial tree, creating two extremely deep holes before falling to the ground. Su Yurong's wings were stained with golden blood and fire, while Chun Changsheng's Taoist robe was stained with blood. He looked around at his surroundings and found them rather familiar, but there was no time to think. In a streak of light, the angel slowly landed on the ground. The spear of light in its hand was thinner than before, the mottled bloodstains on its surface even more distinct. Chun Changsheng raised the sword in his hand and stood in front of Su Yurong. The stainless sword had clashed with the spear of light 4 times. The sword was undamaged, but his body was on the verge of collapse, his right hand constantly trembling. It was obvious that Su Yurong had made a massive mistake. She had probably wanted to borrow the wildfire of the celestial tree to strengthen her phoenix fire while also using the ancestral spirit of the demi-human race to suppress the soul of the angel. But the ancestral spirit in the celestial tree showed no reaction to the arrival of the angel, as if it had already accepted it. Even more frightening was that the wildfire of the celestial tree seeping out of the leaves had been absorbed by the angel, making it even stronger. Just why was this happening? Su Yurong's condition was a little better than Chun Changsheng's. Her face was also rather pale, but her expression was very indifferent. Chun Changsheng was somewhat relieved, but also confused. Is a brightly lit Tao heart really so formidable? In this sort of situation, how can she still be so calm? He had no time to ponder these questions. The angel had already walked over, exuding a pressure as vast as the sea of stars. While Chun Changsheng and Su Yurong were in desperate straits deep in the mountains, the situation in White Emperor City had become extremely dangerous. Mao Qiuyu remained in the capital. In the end, the Li Palace's grand array was not in its most perfect state. It had trapped that ball of light in the darkness for so long, but it was finally showing signs of collapse. A streak of cold darkness silently floated out from the courtyard and rolled towards Tang 36's body. The Orthodoxy's divine staff in Tang 36's hand radiated light, presiding over the Li Palace's grand array. He could not be distracted at this time, much less retreat. Linghai Zhuang and the other archbishops were also focusing their true essence and spiritual senses on maintaining the array, resisting the angel in the mist of light. The blind zither player, heavily injured, had retreated from the courtyard and had yet to catch his breath. The clouds of makeup rose once more. The chains clattered, and the cudgels of water and fire shattered the darkness. The government labors and the girl appeared in front of Tang 36, blocking the demon lord's sneak attack. But they could not prevent the darkness from interfering with the connection between the divine staff and the other treasures. It had to be said that the demon lord had chosen the perfect time and target. Under the terrifying attacks of the angel, the incomplete Li Palace's grand array was already on the verge of collapse. Finally, it could not hold on any longer. A peal of thunder suddenly boomed in the distant sky, and then there was a crisp crack. It was like a mischievous little beast from a demi-human tribe several hundred li away, breaking a porcelain bottle that his grandfather had traded for 300 gene of beast hide in human territory. The moment the bottle broke, liquid light gushed out, filling the sky with darkness. It surrounded, cut, and then melted the light emitted by the Li Palace's grand array. Yesterday, I said some nonsense after a long absence. I miss everyone very much. To me, the realization of my longing is nothing but chatting with everyone. Too many bad things have happened in this past year, making me question life and then very tired. In short, I hope that all of you are well, and I also want to be well. To be continued. Chapter 213. This light came from a streamlined and extremely beautiful pestle of light. This pestle of light was gripped in a steady and terrifying hand. This hand belonged to the angel that had broken through the mist of light. This angel of sacred light presided over war and had been named Fury by Bi Yanghong. Its eyes, devoid of human emotion, were brimming with ruthlessness and a desire to kill. In its eyes, these human experts were like ants. It had been trapped by these ants for so long, a humiliation that it could not endure. To wash away this humiliation, it had decided to kill everyone around this courtyard. No, it had decided to kill everyone in this city. Almost tangible liquid light followed its movements and sprinkled into the surrounding sky, carrying with it an unimaginable aura of terror. Any living being that touched this liquid light would instantly turn cold, lose its breath and soul. Whether it was the birds in the sky or the flowering trees by the stream outside the courtyard. The golden liquid light sprinkled against the Li Palace's grand array. Countless bolts of lightning illuminated the darkness, bringing with them thunderous impacts. In the sky, the falling star stone rapidly spun, but the black path grew smaller and smaller. The gloom willow also became mottled, and all the treasures of the Li Palace were suppressed. The angel saw that these ants were still bitterly holding on, and its ruthlessness intensified. It let out a howl brimming with a desire to kill. The howl landed on the ground, stirring up countless gales that shattered the eardrums of many priests. Some of the weaker priests even fainted. Finally, the porcelain bottle broke completely and shattered into pieces, just like the blue sky that had suddenly appeared above everyone's heads. The falling star stone, the gloom willow, and the other treasures of the Li Palace flew back into the hands of Linghai Zhuang and the others. With the Li Palace's grand array broken, those maintaining the array suffered an extremely powerful backlash. Their faces turned abnormally pale, massive waves raging in their seas of consciousness. As the pivot of the array, Tang 36 suffered the greatest impact. He vomited blood and tottered, his grip on the divine staff almost slipping out of his hand. The cosmetic-selling girl rushed back to his side and supported him. The other experts of the Tang clan stood around him. The blind zither player struggled back to his feet, his blood-stained fingers trembling as they plucked the strings, producing a dull and hoarse sound. The darkness swept out from the depths of the courtyard. Unbroken by the zither music, it quickly reached the gate. The demon lord walked out of the darkness. He was holding a stone pestle in his hand. There was nothing special about it, but it seemed to have some kind of magical power that attracted countless gazes. The angel of the sacred light also walked out of the darkness, but it was higher up in the sky, above everyone else. Countless rays of light shone down from the sky. They did not disperse the darkness of the night. Instead, they shrouded the courtyard along with the darkness of the night. Everyone felt that unimaginable pressure, and their faces turned extremely pale. Hundreds of priests forcefully endured the agony in their sea of consciousness. They lowered their heads and recited the Taoist scriptures. The pious chanting reverberated around the courtyard, resisting the pressure from the light. Naturally, it revealed a solemn and stirring feeling. Ling Haizhuang and Lin and the others also arrived at the main gate of the courtyard, staring at the demon lord on the stone steps. They knew that if they wanted to survive today, their only chance was to kill the demon lord before the angel could act. The question was, would the angel give him this chance? "I don't want to kill you this way." The demon lord sighed. "Alas, none of you gave me any other choice." The blind zither players said nothing. Ling Haizhuang's complexion flickered, and Tang 36 tightly gripped the divine staff. They could tell that the demon lord was speaking the truth. Two angels of the sacred light, separated by 100-some li, appeared in the sky at the same time. The two shores of the Red River, whether it was the mountains or the stone city, were shrouded in light. The light contained an unimaginable pressure, announcing the arrival of powerful beings of different levels from the other world. Looking at the scene in the sky and feeling the sacred pressure in those rays of light, the people of White Emperor City were terrified to the extreme. Many people were so frightened that they directly sat on the ground. Even the bravest demi-human warriors turned pale and could not muster up the courage to fight. The important personages of the demi-human race that had entered the imperial city, like Jin Yulu, Xiaoda, the Sher clan leader, and the Bear tribe leader, also saw the two angels in the sky. They were still standing, unfazed, but their complexions were very unsightly. There had been no sign of activity from the observation platform. The White Emperor might be in a standoff with Madame Mu. So who would deal with these two angels? These two angels of the sacred light were opponents they could not defeat, and this made them furious and unwilling. "I'm very unhappy." Jin Yulu took a giant axe from the Bear tribe leader's waist and turned to Xiaoda. "Throw me into the sky. I want to try hacking at their heads." He was the most senior and had the highest cultivation level, so no one objected. The other demi-human experts were also very unhappy. Xiaoda indifferently said, "I plan to sit on a black vulture and stab that fellow." The Bear tribe leader said, "Then I'll throw." Jin Yulu expressed his agreement. He pointed at the angel above White Emperor City and said, "I'll hit this one." Xiaoda pointed at the angel on the other side of the Red River and said, "Then I'll hit that one." A large part of the demi-human experts' displeasure stemmed from the attitude of the two angels. The two angels were far too indifferent. Even though they could sense the fighting intent of the demi-human experts, their expressions did not change. It was like to them, this city, this continent's so-called experts were all ants. Those people, their faces full of fear, and if not for the fact that it was so crowded, their legs might have turned to jelly, were even more ants. The vast majority of the populace had flooded into the streets, either fleeing in all directions or looking fearfully at the sky. The inn on the side of the street was already empty. A stray cat had sneaked into the kitchen, attempting to take advantage of a freshly cooked piece of meat. There was a light crack from a room on the second floor of the inn, like a mirror had been smashed. The stray cat that had just leapt onto the stove was startled. With a meow, it flew out of the window and vanished. The crowd paled as they stared at the sky. They paid no attention to the noise in the inn, nor did they know what had happened inside. A few moments later, a blue-clothed Taoist walked out of the inn. This Taoist had calm eyes and a head of black hair devoid of frost. His walk was indescribably casual, and his arched brows exuded an intimidating air of nobility. Based on his appearance, he was at most 20 years old, but based on his bearing, he had lived for at least 200 years, and that was in the imperial court. Based on his eyes, one could say that he had lived for 1,000 years. Of course, that was when he traveled the Jianghu. No one noticed this blue-clothed Taoist. He walked into the crowd and, just like the demi-human populace, raised their heads to the sky, gazed at the two angels. The eyes of the demi-human populace were filled with fear, despair, and even inexplicable zeal. The blue-clothed Taoist's eyes were devoid of emotion, only indifference, like he was looking at a dead creature. To be continued. Chapter 2:14. While the blue-clothed Taoist was looking at the sky, the White Emperor was also looking at the sky. But he was not looking at the two angels, but at the other side of the clouds to the west. This is the greatest change that has occurred in this world in the last few years. You are confident that you can control everything in this world, that you can disregard all living beings in this world and me, but this is a world beyond this world. Can you still continue to remain calm? Madame Mu indifferently looked at him and said, "Perhaps no one in this world can disobey you, so I borrowed a strange army from beyond the heavens. You did not think of this, so in the end, you lost control of the entire situation. What can you do now?" The White Emperor gazed at the sea of clouds and seriously asked, "Are you sure that you can control the entire situation?" Madame Mu replied, "Of course you're very powerful, but in order to deceive the entire continent, you've become much weaker. Deceiving others and deceiving oneself, isn't that describing a doubtful and boring man like you? Even if I can't defeat you, I can at least keep you alive for a while." If she could delay the White Emperor for a while, the two angels of sacred light could kill Chun Changsheng and Su Yurong, as well as the experts of the orthodoxy. Then they could slaughter the demi-human experts loyal to the White Emperor, and the situation would be set in stone. The White Emperor faintly smiled. "Yinner, since you know that I'm doubtful, are you not worried that I have other preparations?" Madame Mu's eyes revealed an intense disgust at being addressed as Yinner. She said, "Bai Xingye, put away your act. Just hearing it makes me sick. Several hundred years have passed, and at this time, can't we just have a proper conversation?" The White Emperor's smile did not fade, but seemed even more sincere. "Speak, I'm listening. Back then, Shang Xingzhou deceived you, making you think that you could easily pluck the fruit of the Demon Lord. But in the end, both you and the Demon Lord were heavily wounded. In the last few years, all you could do was sit on a stone mountain and watch his limitless glory. Are you willing? Since he deceived you, why would he dare to come here? Is he not afraid that you'll trick him back?" Madame Mu sneered. "The paranoid will die from their paranoia. This is precisely the case for people like you and Shang Xingzhou." The White Emperor calmly replied, "These words are reasonable, but you also know that today's situation is different." Madame Mu replied, "Even if Shang Xingzhou wanted to come, it's too late. And if he could come, why aren't you hurrying over to kill me?" Bai Di sighed and said, "Do you still not believe that I have never thought of killing you?" After saying this, Emperor Bai's gaze suddenly changed. His pupils suddenly disappeared, leaving only the whites of his eyes. They looked abnormally terrifying and fiendish. The world was completely white. It could be a sea of clouds or a snowy plain. The traces of the violent wind and snow appeared in his eyes. The clouds around Madame Mu suddenly began to roil, spreading in all directions like a blizzard of goose feathers. An extremely condensed power descended from the clouds to the ground. With a loud boom, countless flowering trees in the imperial city fell, and the stone palace creaked. The observation deck, which bore the brunt of the force, even sank half a foot. The observation deck sank into the cliff, but it did not collapse, because the White Emperor was on the observation platform. He clasped his hands behind his back and quietly looked at the sky. Countless clouds also arrived at the observation platform along with that power. These clouds came from the Western Sea and were imbued with limitless moisture and weight. But when these clouds encountered the White Emperor's body, they instantly lost all weight, leaving behind only the purest color. Countless white clouds coiled around the White Emperor's body, spinning with unimaginable speed until they became a viscous cloud. This viscous cloud was enshrouded in boundless light and heat. Not even the knife-like winds it encountered as it flew through the air could change its shape in the slightest. This cloud was not like a pirate, nor was it like Grand Scholar Tungus. A thunderous roar exploded over White Emperor City. The white cloud flew toward the large courtyard in the western part of the city, leaving behind a clear shadow in the blue sky. This was a white tiger, even larger than the snowy peaks of the Starfall Mountains. Seeing the white tiger projected in the sky, White Emperor City erupted with countless excited cheers. The angel of sacred light that had just broken through the Lee Palace's grand array and was prepared to kill all the human priests and demi-human civilians in the city looked up at the sky. It was the angel of war. Amongst the servants of God, it was the most ruthless and most fond of killing. It had never known fear. However, when he saw the light and shadow in the sky and the white cloud whizzing over, he still felt a strong sense of vigilance and even thought of retreating. It could clearly sense that this was the strongest opponent it had ever encountered on the continent. It was even stronger than the human expert it had killed a few days ago. In a very short amount of time, the angel made its decision. It raised its fighting intent to its limits, let out a thunderous roar, and smashed the pestle of light at the cloud. If the White Emperor had attacked with his real body, it might have chosen to temporarily retreat, but since it was just a soul, it was confident in its ability to defeat it. The white tiger formed from clouds arrived above the courtyard. It opened its mouth, revealing sharp fangs as it bit down on the pestle of light. Crack! The fangs and pestle of light scraped, producing countless tiny but still terrifying bolts of lightning. Thunder boomed in the sky and fierce winds blew away the darkness and remaining light in the courtyard. A terrifying pressure flattened all the buildings in the courtyard. Even the sand on the ground seemed to turn into bricks. The priests could not bear it any longer, and one by one, they fled outside. Tang 36, protected by the blind zither player and the others, vomited blood, his face even paler. The demon lord was just about to charge forward and kill this person when he suddenly sensed something. He looked up at the sky, his face suffused with shock and disbelief. In the sky, a blue-clothed Taoist silently appeared behind the angel. The angel was currently fighting with the White Emperor's soul, its attention completely focused on the pestle of light. But it was an angel born from the laws of the world, so it still found it incomprehensible that it had failed to sense the blue-clothed man behind it. This was an abnormally bizarre and terrifying sight. The blue-clothed Taoist stretched out both hands and gripped the angel's wings. The angel finally sensed it, its eyes bursting with boundless fear, like an abyss. It had no time to do anything, not even to turn its head. Crack! There was a soft sound, like a pretty girl tearing at a fan, like a noble young master tearing at a book. The angel's wings had been torn off by the blue-clothed Taoist. A scream echoed through the air. It was a scream of incomparable pain, anger, and despair. It was like a clap of thunder echoing over White Emperor City. When I was watching Blasphemy, I loved watching Fatty Luo tear off the angel's wings. Perhaps it was because I always craved the roast chicken my classmate bought. And then there was the scene of a dwarf wielding a broadsword and leaping into the sky to chop down the angel. Oh, I really love that sight. I definitely have to imitate it in the next scroll. To be continued. Chapter 2:15. Wind and thunder stirred. Wretched cries pierced through the air. The red river rippled, sending countless sprays into the sky like snow and then falling back down, concealing the figures of those fleeing jings. With a scream, the angel plummeted to the ground, its golden blood spraying across the sky, drawing out two clear lines. Even though it was heavily injured and in unbearable pain, it still maintained its calm, wanted to find a final sliver of hope in the midst of despair. Its two wings had been torn off by the blue-clothed Taoist, causing it to lose the lightning-fast speed it was so proud of. It simply gave up on flying and plummeted to the ground. Faster and faster, the golden blood spurting from its back no longer able to keep up. The air burned from its impact, transforming into a line of fire. Like a meteor, it smashed into the ground. Only this way could it maintain its speed. Only this way could it have any hope of escaping that quiet and terrifying Taoist. With a boom, the angel smashed into the riverbank, smashing out a massive hole. The massive impact had no effect on it. Without hesitation, it stood up and prepared to flee to the other side of the river. Its stronger companion was in the mountains on the other side of the river. However, just as he got up, another meteorite fell into the huge pit in the river. The White Emperor left the observation platform and landed on the ground, his foot stomping on the angel's chest. Countless cracking sounds could be heard, as if a stone was being crushed by an even harder and larger stone. The angel's body twitched a few times, golden blood oozing from its nose and mouth. Then it closed its eyes and died. The White Emperor slowly pulled back his foot. He looked pensively at the golden blood on the angel's face. His gaze moved down to the angel's lower body. It was smooth and clean, devoid of any distinguishing features. The White Emperor froze, then shook his head. It turned out to be a birdman that was neither male nor female. The so-called angel was nothing more than this. The angel of sacred light called Fury died. The direct cause of its swift death was that when it saw the white tiger silhouette in the sky, it did not choose to flee, but to fight. Based on the specific situation at that time, his judgment and choice were not wrong. At the time, the White Emperor's attention had to be focused on Madame Mu in the clouds. Even though the human experts outside the courtyard were on the verge of being killed, even though the people in the city were on the verge of being slaughtered, he could still only send a strand of his soul to attack, just like the Tian Hai Divine Empress in the coup of the Mausoleum of Books. If he could block the White Emperor's soul attack, even if it was just for a little while, the other angel could kill Qin Changsheng and Su Yurong, and then turn around to join Madame Mu in attacking the White Emperor. At that time, no matter how strong the White Emperor was, he would still be no match for them. The problem was he did not expect that other than Emperor Bai, there would be another true, unparalleled expert in the city. After descending, they had a better understanding of the experts in this continent. They knew that there was a Taoist who was very powerful. In their minds, it was impossible for that Taoist to appear. But the Taoist priest appeared. So he died. The whole thing was that simple. The Taoist in indigo also landed on the riverbank. The river breeze ruffled his black hair and fluttered his blue robes. He truly seemed like an immortal. With a casual stretch of his hand, he had torn off one of the angel's wings. There was only one blue-clothed Taoist in the world. Shang Xingzhou, the middle-aged Taoist from Xining's old temple, was now the strongest expert of the continent and the ruler of the human race. Shang Xingzhou and the White Emperor were old friends, but they did not reminisce because the battle was still not over. They looked across the Red River. Deep within the mountains, a celestial tree was swaying back and forth. The chi of the wildfire soared into the sky, occasionally accompanied by a few sword intents. The sky was filled with a rain of swords and streaks of fire. Qin Changxing's left hand gripped the 5 heavenly tome monoliths, but he still did not release them. Su Yurong stood behind him, already drawing the Tong bow, but the Wu arrow was still knocked. The angel felt threatened, but it did not care. It controlled the entire situation, and it could no longer be reversed. It flew through the celestial tree like a bolt of lightning, indifferently watching the young man and woman in front of the celestial tree. Suddenly, it stopped, standing on an extremely thick branch of the celestial tree. Qin Changsheng did not use the sword to send the stone away, nor did Su Yurong release the bowstring, because both of them, just like the angel, had heard that scream that had echoed over White Emperor City and caused the entire Red River to seethe with unease. The angel turned to a certain place on the opposite shore, its emotionless eyes suddenly bursting with boundless shock. It could clearly sense that its companion was dead, and then it sensed 2 extremely powerful chis. Its pure white wings stirred up a fierce gale as it immediately prepared to leave. Just when it was preparing to leave, a crack suddenly appeared in the sky to the north. This crack began to expand with indescribable speed. In an extremely short amount of time, it was 10 some li long. Beyond this spatial crack was not an endless abyss or a different world brimming with turbulence. It was a city that should have been on the other side of the river. This city was White Emperor City. Outside the city was a river. By the river was a beach. A person stood on the beach. The White Emperor. The crack in the sky did not disappear. A sharp metal horn protruded from the very bottom, its surface engraved with some sort of complex and incomprehensible design. This metal horn had torn through space and then magically linked this place to White Emperor City, which was clearly behind it. The angel in Changsheng did not know what this was, but Su Yurong did. She had looked at this bronze mirror many times in the inn and was very familiar with its design. There was another person who knew. The clear sky mirror. In the clouds, Madame Mu's face was somewhat pale, even whiter than the surrounding sea of clouds. A moment ago, when Shang Xingzhou silently appeared behind the dead angel, she knew that she had lost. No matter how meticulous black robes and her plan had been, it had ultimately failed. But at that moment, she still could not understand how Shang Xingzhou had managed to ignore the distance of 80,000 li and suddenly travel from the capital to White Emperor City. Only when the shard of the bronze mirror pierced through the sky did she find the answer. 70% of the orthodoxy's authority was in Chun Changsheng's hands, because he was the pope. But the orthodoxy's resources were still in Shang Xingzhou's hands. The White Emperor did not walk into the spatial path. The clear sky mirror was already destroyed, and the spatial crack forcibly torn open by the shard was not stable. It could not endure the chi of a great monster like him. And even now, the vast majority of his attention was still on the clouds, on Madame Mu. No one in the world understood his wife better than he did, so he was extremely cautious. But he still moved. This time he still moved his soul. The image of a white tiger in the sky tore apart the sea of clouds. His soul walked into the Red River, into the crack. When it came out, it was already in the mountains. A divine chant flowed out of the angel's lips like water. An incomparably dignified chi and somber fighting intent appeared in its eyes. It was still powerful. If the White Emperor and Shang Xingzhou could only use their souls to attack, it should be able to leave. The spear of light pierced through the leaves of the celestial tree and the clouds, stabbing at the White Emperor's soul. Like invisible flames, the spear of light madly burned between the spear of light and the White Emperor's soul. In this blinding light, the White Emperor's soul gradually dimmed. The angel was still wary and uneasy, because the White Emperor's expression was also very indifferent. The clear sky mirror shard cut through the sky. Through the crack, one could see the riverbank behind it. At the time, the White Emperor had been the only one on the riverbank. Now, the White Emperor was still the only one on the riverbank. He calmly gazed at the other shore, at the western part of the sea of clouds. Shang Xingzhou was no longer at his side. The great river surged, his blue robes drifting in the wind. Shang Xingzhou had personally come. In an instant, he had crossed several dozen li of rivers and mountains, leaving behind a blur of blue robes in the sky. The celestial trees swayed, and the sky was filled with a rain of swords. Shang Xingzhou turned a blind eye, saying nothing to Qin Changsheng. He extended his right hand into the rain of swords. Like plucking a flower or plucking a leaf, he plucked a sword from the rain of swords. To be continued. Chapter 216. Qin Changsheng knew what his teacher was preparing to do, so he naturally would not stop him. Even if he wanted to stop him, he might not have been able to. Shang Xingzhou gripped the sword. The style of this sword was rather simple and unadorned, perhaps old-fashioned. In the rain of swords, it was very unremarkable. When Qin Changsheng had taken the 10,000-some swords from the sword pool in the Garden of Zhou, he had not noticed this sword. Later on, the orthodoxy decided to return these swords to the sects and monasteries of the past. The Li Palace dispatched many extremely experienced and knowledgeable priests to register these swords, but there was still no one who knew the origins of this sword. However, because this sword was too unremarkable, no one cared too much about it. Without knowing its origins, it was naturally impossible to know where to send it, so the sword remained at Qin Changsheng's side. In the following battles, This sword was just like his other companions, following his will and becoming a part of the sword array, a drop in the rain of swords. It was still unremarkable, until today, when Shang Xingzhou gripped this sword. The gloomy cliff obscured by the leaves of the celestial tree suddenly brightened, as if another sun had appeared. The sword exuded a dazzling light. This sword was a Buddhist sword. Its name was Vairocana Buddha. The Buddhist sect had died out long ago, and there were no records of it in the Taoist canon or the books of the people. Who else could recognize this sword? Currently, only 3 people on the continent knew the origin of this sword. 2 of them were probably in a standoff on the snowy plains to the north of Tianliang County. Only Shang Xingzhou was present. He had spotted this sword in the rain of swords and taken it. The Buddhist sect cultivated the heart, and the Buddhist sword settled the heart. Vairocana Buddha was a sword that followed the heart, a true sword of the heart. The Xining Temple also cultivated the heart. One could imagine just how terrifying this sword would be in Shang Xingzhou's hands. The angel sensed danger and let out a low roar of thunder, wanting to blast away the White Emperor's soul and use all its strength to deal with it. A blue blur streaked across the sky. It was Shang Xingzhou's Taoist robe. The White Emperor's soul gradually dispersed. A stream of golden blood shot out of the angel's chest. It had not been able to avoid Shang Xingzhou's sword, and its body had been pierced through. This sword had come from nowhere and could not return. Who could avoid it? There was dead silence on the cliff. The angel lowered its head to the hole in its chest, a pained expression on its face. Golden blood continuously dripped down, bringing about many strange phenomena. The blood-soaked ground suddenly sprouted a lot of grass, and among the grass were pure and holy white flowers. Chen Chang Sheng and Su Yurong didn't feel too happy. Instead, they felt a little cold. They saw that sword. This sword was too terrifying. Or rather, Shang Xingzhou was too terrifying. His sword moved according to his will, and he had truly achieved the state of being unpredictable. Who could avoid such a sword? Even if Chen Chang Sheng and Su Yurong combined their swords, facing such a sword, they could only accept death. They felt a chill, not only because of this deduction, but also because Shang Xingzhou was looking at Chen Chang Sheng. Yes, Shang Xingzhou no longer paid any attention to the angel, not even glancing at it. He held the Vairocana sword and quietly looked at Chen Chang Sheng. No one knew what he was thinking or what he was going to do. But one thing was certain. In Shang Xingzhou's view, the angel he had heavily injured was no longer a threat. So who was the threat he most wanted to eliminate on the 2 shores of the Red River? The events of the past few years had long since proved this. Countless waves appeared on the broad Red River. The White Emperor did not come over, but he drew back his gaze from the western sky and gave a profound glance at the other shore. His eyes were white and seemed rather demonic, like the coldest and fiercest snowstorm. Shang Xingzhou no longer looked at Chen Chang Sheng, but looked back. Separated by the surging river, the 2 most powerful saints of the continent stared at each other. For a moment, turbid waves filled the air, cold winds howled, and the wind stirred. The situation had changed far too suddenly. Just a moment ago, Shang Xingzhou and the White Emperor had worked together to kill one angel and heavily injure the other. Now they were in a standoff. Was it because Shang Xingzhou had glanced at Chen Chang Sheng? Or was it because of some deeper reason? Chen Chang Sheng could not understand, nor did he continue to think. Although the angel had been pierced through by Shang Xingzhou's sword and heavily injured, it had not completely lost the ability to fight. If it was allowed to leave alive, the human race would assuredly encounter a terrifying foe in their northern expedition against the demons. Perhaps Shang Xingzhou's sword would pierce through its chest, but he still had to stop it from happening. However, Su Yurong tugged at his sleeve. The angel flapped its wings and transformed into a stream of light that shot toward the north. Chen Changxing knew that he was too late. Shang Xingzhou and the White Emperor were still in a standoff. The only person present that could catch up to the angel was Su Yurong. The angel of sacred light was already too heavily injured and was probably no match for her. The problem was, if she left, what would happen to Qin Changsheng? Even if they used their swords together, they were still no match for Shang Xingzhou, but it was still much better than fighting alone. Qin Changsheng turned to Su Yurong and said, "The White Emperor will not let me die." Su Yurong replied, "Nor will I." Shang Xingzhou looked at the White Emperor on the other shore, an unfathomable smile on his face, and then he said a few words. "Zhu Sha, kill him." The White Emperor's expression flickered. Qin Changsheng was shocked. A black-clothed girl walked out of the celestial tree hollow. At some point, the chains that bound her to the cliff had been undone. Only now did Qin Changsheng understand why he felt that this cliff was somewhat familiar. He turned to Su Yurong. Su Yurong smiled. Thus, he understood even more things. Why had she been so calm when the angel had forced her into desperate straits? Why had she said to him that he should at least tell the plan to a certain person? And then he understood the current situation. Shang Xingzhou had set up this trap to kill those two angels. For some reason, the White Emperor did not want the angel to be killed. Of course, he also did not want Qin Changsheng to die. Thus, Shang Xingzhou and the White Emperor had suddenly gone from companions to opponents. But the White Emperor had not expected that Shang Xingzhou had already arranged for a final send-off for the angel. As for whether Shang Xingzhou wanted to kill him or not, there was no need to think about this question. The Black Dragon turned to Qin Changsheng. Although Shang Xingzhou had saved her, she would still only listen to his words. Because she was his protector, Shang Xingzhou said nothing, appearing very calm. Because he had a deep understanding of his student and knew what he would choose at a time like this. Without hesitation, Qin Changsheng said, "Go." In the howling winds and scattering leaves, the black-clothed girl vanished. High in the clouds, the heavily injured angel circled around the fissure cut open by the clear sky mirror and flew north. Suddenly, it saw a black mountain range that extended for 10-some li. It was like the Starfall mountain range had suddenly risen from the ground to the sky. To be continued. Chapter 217. In the distant depths of the southern sea, a stream of light suddenly stopped and the angel appeared. Its body had been pierced through by the Vairocana sword and was heavily injured. Not even divine blood could heal it. It had to return to Shualao City as quickly as possible to receive the offerings of the sacrificial altar. But a black mountain range had appeared in the northern sky, blocking all its paths. No matter which direction it chose, it could not get around that black mountain range. This mountain range could move. It was a black frost dragon. Even in the sacred light continent, or even in the legendary world of light, the black frost dragon was the most noble and rarest of creatures. But this black frost dragon had not yet matured. In normal times, the angel might have been wary, but it would never have retreated without a fight. The problem was that its injuries were too severe. It could only rely on its pure white wings to maintain its speed and ensure that the angel would not catch up, but it did not dare to act recklessly. But after so long, its injuries had gradually worsened. In the end, it had reached the point where it had to fight to the death. The sun shone over the mirror-like surface of the sea, causing mist to rise and the air to be somewhat stifling. The angel turned to the horizon. A black line rapidly approached and then suddenly stopped. The black-clothed girl stepped through the air with a thunderous dragon roar. The language of the divine race and dragon race was extremely similar, so the angel could understand its meaning. "My injuries are truly very severe, but I still have the strength to kill you." The angel's face was abnormally pale, almost transparent, but its expression was extremely solemn. It spoke in that complicated language. "In the depths of the sea far from the continent, I believe that no one can help you." At the start, it had attempted to pass through the mountains to return to the land of demons. It had flown for a very long time in the belly of the continent, even managing to avoid the little black dragon's interception several times. But at the final juncture, it had chosen to give up because it had sensed several extremely powerful chis waiting for it up ahead. Some of these chis were like the sun, some like an ancient well, and some like a blade. It was obvious that these human experts were all over the continent, waiting to kill it. The angel did not dare to take this risk, so it left the continent and headed for the farthest depths of the southern sea. This so-called fight to the death was actually seeking survival in the face of death. The Taoist and the white-clothed girl still had a few more important matters to attend to in White Emperor City, like the young man's life or death. As long as he could kill this black frost dragon, no one on this continent would be able to keep up with his speed. When the time came, as long as he chose a good route and avoided the human experts scattered across the continent, there was a high chance that he could return to Shualao City. A divine chant flowed out of the angel's thin lips like water. His expression became even more solemn, and pious. His aura had also become much stronger. He pinned all his hopes and glory on this upcoming battle. The little black dragon's expression was not very serious, not even serious. As she watched the angel grow stronger and stronger, she did not feel like she was facing a powerful foe. On the contrary, she felt like she was watching an idiot perform. She suddenly remembered something her father had told her many, many years ago. Those angels, because of their pride, they're stupid. It's best to kill them. Yes, father. These angels are as stupid as you said. The black dragon was rather sentimental. Between the blue sky and the sea, there was no wind, no sound. Suddenly, the sea began to move, roiling like it was boiling. Several dozen islands of various sizes slowly rose from the sea. On those islands lay all kinds of dragons, big and small. This was the Dragon Islands, where all the dragons of this world lived. The sun was high in the sky, the time when they basked in the sun. Several dozen dragon cries rose and fell, some dignified, some violent, some frivolous. Several dozen mountainous dragon bodies stretched across the sky, blocking out all the sunlight. Several dozen dragon breaths, some terrifyingly powerful and some very weak, fell on the angel's body. After a few moments of silence, the angel lowered its spear of light. In the sea, it sank into its darkest depths. Its eyes were open, gazing at the sunlight on the surface of the sea. It did not feel cold or fear. On the contrary, it felt rather warm. The southern sea's waters were warm because there were few clouds and the sunlight was fierce. The Red River's waters were not cold because some of the wildfire beneath the celestial tree had seeped out through the cracks in the rocks. Today, the amount of wildfire that had seeped out was especially great. The waters of the river were even warmer, and the red algae were cheerfully growing. It didn't take long for the waters to be dyed even redder. Normally, the jings, which fed on the red algae, would be happily feasting, occasionally slapping their massive tails against the surface of the river, creating a spectacular spectacle. But these intelligent creatures had long ago dove into the deepest depths of the river, not daring to show their heads. The river was so calm that it looked like a piece of red satin. The two shores were empty. White Emperor City was in an uproar. This was especially the case for the courtyard in the western part of the city that bordered the Xiang clan's estate. It was packed with people, a dense mass of people. The houses in the courtyard had completely collapsed. Broken bricks and broken beams could be seen everywhere, covered in yellow sand. It seemed like it had been abandoned for decades. The Li Palace's grand array had been broken, the angel dead, but the priests around the courtyard had not left. Linghai Zhuang and the other prefects of the orthodoxy, even heavily injured, still stood guard in front of the gate. Tang 36's face was pale. He needed the support of the cosmetic-selling girl to stand. They had not left because the demon lord was still inside, but they also could not enter because the entire courtyard had been surrounded by the Red River Beast Guard. Xiaoda, the Shi clan leader, and 10 some demi-human experts stood in front of the gate. The two sides silently faced each other. Suddenly, a few voices came from behind. The orthodoxy priests parted like a tide. Chen Changsheng and Su Yurong walked over. Several hundred swords flew through the air, forming a sword array in the sky. Xiaoda had no intention of stepping aside. He looked at Chen Changsheng and said, "This is His Majesty's will. Please forgive me." The meadow around Heaven's Guard Pavilion maintained its tender green color, nourished by the river water. The gray slabs of the street had been somewhat damp from a mist and glistened with an oily luster. The White Emperor gazed at the activity in front of the courtyard, at the rain of swords in the sky, a hint of admiration appearing in his eyes. Qin Changxing's path of the sword was even more powerful than the rumors said. Shang Xingzhou walked to his side and said, "If I want to kill someone, no one can stop me, not even you." He was not speaking of Qin Changxing, but the Demon Lord. To him, killing those two angels was only the most basic of goals. If he could also kill the Demon Lord, then the human race could be said to have obtained a complete victory. The White Emperor had even wanted to leave the Angel of Sacred Light alive, let alone the Demon Lord. So he asked Shang Xingzhou a question. "After you die, which student will the human race belong to?" To be continued. Chapter 218. The important part of this statement was not the latter half, but the first three words. The White Emperor had no interest in using Qin Changxing and Yuren to provoke Shang Xingzhou's emotions. He had very frankly, or rather shamelessly, expressed his bottom line to Shang Xingzhou. If Shang Xingzhou insisted on the Demon Lord's death, Shang Xingzhou might be heavily injured today, perhaps even killed. Only this would involve the question of which student the human race would be handed over to. Why did the White Emperor have the confidence to say this? Shang Xingzhou understood that everything originated from Madame Mu, who had never been mentioned. She had been standing in the clouds this entire time, with no intention of leaving. No matter how one looked at it, the betrayed White Emperor could not forgive Madame Mu. But Shang Xingzhou knew that the White Emperor could change his attitude at any time, even if it disgusted him. Some people will live, and some people will die. Shang Xingzhou looked into the White Emperor's eyes. The stones shattered and a wave of qi surged through the street, collapsing the black eaves of a row of houses. Countless gazes looked over. They saw Shang Xingzhou, but not the White Emperor. The White Emperor had arrived in the clouds. He and Madame Mu quietly faced each other. "You've finished your discussion with Shang Xingzhou?" Madame Mu seemed to be asking a very ordinary question. The White Emperor also casually replied, "The Demon Lord will live." Madame Mu looked to the west and said, "Sometimes I also wonder just how all this began. Perhaps it's because you always like to look at home. Everything originates from one's own choices, like the choice you made 3 years ago." The White Emperor said, "I didn't think that as husband and wife, you would actually want to put me to death." Madame Mu indifferently said, "In my life, I have never seen someone as hypocritical as you. Even at a time like this, you still want to say these things." The White Emperor smiled. "Was it not you who used the strength of the sea tides to seal my mausoleum?" Madame Mu turned to look into his eyes. "Was it not your own choice to enter death's seclusion?" The White Emperor did not answer, instead asking, "When did you confirm that I was still alive?" Madame Mu replied, "On that night, old Xiang went to the Starfall Mountains. When he returned, he said that he sensed your will." The White Emperor asked, "Was it not you who requested him to do this?" Madame Mu replied, "This is Luo Heng's marriage. Even if I requested it, he would not dare to refuse your order." "I don't know what you mean." The White Emperor said, "If I remember correctly, he should have secretly sided with you 2 years ago." Madame Mu mocked. "If my guess is correct, this was something you arranged for him to do 3 years ago." Countless years ago, the entire continent believed that the White Emperor and Madame Mu were deeply in love, a saint couple admired by the world. Who would have thought that there was no trust between them at all? The so-called mutual deception was just a daily routine. The White Emperor asked, "Why do you suspect him?" Madame Mu jeered. "Anyone with eyes can see that he is your loyal dog, your fervent believer." Perhaps he was thinking of that mountain-like figure that had collapsed in front of the imperial city, but the White Emperor fell silent for a very long time. In the eyes of others, this was either regret, sadness, or self-blame. But in Madame Mu's view, this was a shameless and nauseating act. "There's no need for you to put on such an act in front of me. For the last 200 years, you've always wanted to kill this most prestigious and most senior elder, wanted to eliminate the Xiang clan he belongs to. But because he and his clansmen are too loyal, you've never been able to find a suitable excuse or reason. Now that you've finally managed to use his loyalty with great difficulty, to throw a few buckets of dirty water at me. You naturally want to kill him as quickly as possible. The derision on Madame Mu's face intensified. Now that you mention it, you're truly very similar to your old friends, Shang Xingzhou. Truly hypocritical to the extreme. He wants to kill his own student, but he also doesn't want to dirty his own hands. So he wants to borrow my hand, and you do the same. The White Emperor's expression did not change. Since you knew that I was still alive, why didn't you stop me from coming out? If you wanted to come out, you naturally could. If you didn't want to come out, it meant that you wanted to watch the show. Madame Mu expressionlessly said, "We've been husband and wife for many years, so we still have this bit of tacit understanding. By refusing to come out, you are tacitly agreeing to my plan. You want to watch me in black robe do these things, but I don't understand why you would stop me from acting against Qin Changshen." It now appeared that the strength that had left Qin Changshen wary and puzzled no matter how he thought about it had naturally come from the White Emperor. Only the White Emperor could change the allegiance of the entire demi-human race in a single night without appearing. Madame Mu did not need the White Emperor to answer this question. She quickly deduced the answer. "Presumably, you know that Shang Xingzhou can appear at any time." The White Emperor replied, "Correct. In the end, I still underestimated my old friend's daring and methods. I didn't expect that he would request Su Yorong's help. No one wants to drink tea on the stage while you drink tea below the stage." Madame Mu sneered at him. "I don't want you to continue watching the show, and neither does Shang Xingzhou. Everyone wants you to go on stage and sing." The White Emperor replied, "I also underestimated Chen Changshen's resolve and perseverance." Madame Mu thought of those figures that traveled back and forth between the Imperial City and the Starfall Mountains and shook her head. She had also not expected Qin Changshen to have the ability and the revered patience to use the sword array in his hands to wear down the seal. From that moment onwards, the White Emperor could no longer play the role of a miserable and imprisoned sovereign isolated from the world. All the contradictions exploded in that moment. All the stories had their beginnings, and all the characters on the stage entered the stage. This was seeing all living beings. Madame Mu jeered at him. "Although you were ultimately forced out by that master and disciple like a clown, I will not sympathize with you." The White Emperor calmly replied, "I do not need sympathy." "Then what about him?" Madame Mu stroked her abdomen and looked at the White Emperor. "Does your son need sympathy?" A young life that had not had the time to see the heavens and earth, to see all living beings, needed sympathy because it could not see these things. In other words, it had died prematurely. The White Emperor's gaze fell on Madame Mu's abdomen. Madame Mu's abdomen was very flat. "It is not easy for my White Emperor clan to pass on its bloodline. The fetus needs to be pregnant for 5 years, and giving birth is even more difficult." The White Emperor calmly said, "But we already have Luo." Madame Mu stared into his eyes and said, "In the end, she is only a daughter. This is your greatest mistake, because I have never felt that there is any difference between a daughter and a son, so I naturally have never thought about having another son. I still do not understand where the people of the great Western continent come from in this regard." The White Emperor's expression grew more and more derisive, his words more and more harsh. "Because a daughter has to marry and cannot retire, or because a girl is extroverted. But I see that you've been married to my White Emperor's city for so many years, and you've always been thinking about your maiden home. You've never treated this place as your home, and you've never treated me as your family. Since that's the case, what are you worried about?" Chapter 219. Madame Mu fell quiet for a very long time, not replying. She did not know how to answer. No matter how harsh and mocking the White Emperor's words were, no matter how displeased she was, when she carefully thought about it, she truly found it impossible to answer. This fact made her recall the many things that had happened over the last few years. Suddenly, she felt that these things had all been rather absurd over the years. The lonely sail on the western sea cast a distant shadow. How could her homeland be worth looking back upon? But starting many years ago, she had gotten used to thinking in this manner, doing this manner. It truly had been many years. She sighed. "You've probably endured these words for many years." The White Emperor thought this over, then replied, "It's fine, because you didn't show it clearly before, and our daughter is only a teenager. So that's how it is." A hint of loneliness appeared in Madame Mu's eyes. There were still many things that had not been said. Although there was time to say them, there was not much meaning in saying them. Home was where the heart was at peace, so why could her heart never be at peace? Why had she not left just now? Why had she waited to say these words to the White Emperor? Countless clouds surged toward the blue palace dress in the sky. In a very short time, an extremely thick sea of clouds had formed. White waves rose and fell. It was like all the clouds in the world had gathered in the sky above White Emperor City. The all here was truly all. There were the cold clouds over the snowy peaks of the Starfall Mountains, the rain clouds over the western sea. There was also the mist in the mountain streams, the ice on the snowy plains, and even some cloud from the distant cloud grave in the east drifting toward the city. The sea of clouds grew thicker and thicker, wider and wider, covering an area of more than 100 li in radius. The clouds had originally been white, but when there were too many of them and light could no longer penetrate them, they turned gray, then black. If one looked from the ground, the sea of clouds in the sky had become a sea of ink. The sun was obscured on the other side of the clouds, and the world beneath the clouds grew darker and darker, until it was impossible to see anything clearly. Night had come early. White Emperor City was filled with cries of fear. The demi-human populace once more fled in all directions or stood in a daze on the streets, gazing up at the inky sea of clouds. Chen Changsheng and Su Yurong glanced at each other, then raised their heads to the sky. Tang 36 looked up. Xiaoda, the Shi clan leader, and the other demi-humans also looked up. Had the battle between sages begun just like that? Shang Xingzhou was also looking at the sky from the shattered bluestone street. His expression was indifferent, and no one knew what he was thinking. Kacha! A massive bolt of lightning as thick as the heaven tree tore through the sea of clouds and illuminated the entire world before disappearing in midair. In that instant, an area of several li in the inky sea of clouds was painted white. Following that, countless bolts of lightning lit up. Most of them were annihilated before they could break through the clouds. Occasionally, some of them would break through the clouds, but they were unable to land on the ground. These bolts of lightning should have come from above, yet they were able to tear through the clouds that were more than 10 miles deep. One could only imagine how powerful they were. Massive thunder boomed out, bringing with it countless hurricanes that wreaked havoc in the city. The Red River Seal sensed this and naturally activated, forming a massive azure barrier that protected the Imperial City, Heaven's Guard Pavilion, and all the buildings in the upper city. However, it was unable to prevent the hurricanes from toppling the simple residences in the lower city. Countless people were smashed by the bricks and blood. As the lightning tore through the sea of clouds, countless massive waves appeared, occasionally spitting out wisps of cloud that resembled tongues of flame. It was an abnormally magnificent sight. The lightning would occasionally illuminate the world beneath the clouds, but it could not bring any true warmth. The sun, kept out by the extremely thick clouds, could not shed any warmth upon the earth, causing the temperature of White Emperor City to plummet. The moisture in the clouds had no time to condense into beads of water, so they turned into snowflakes and fell to the ground. The wisps of cloud torn apart by the lightning were like scattered dandelions, spraying down an unimaginable amount of snowflakes. This was an extremely rare snowstorm. The people that had fled out of fear or had gone to hide in their homes had already left. The people that remained on the streets naturally would not leave at this time. They stood in the heavy snow, their heads raised to the sky. Alas, while their gazes could pierce through the snowstorm, they could not pierce through the thick clouds to see what was happening. With a light whoosh, Chen Changsheng opened a yellow paper umbrella. Tang 36 was just about to walk in when he realized that he had walked to Su Yurong's side. The cosmetic-buying girl called out to young master and raised the umbrella over his head. And Lin was currently treating the wounds of Linghai Zhuang and the others, occasionally glancing up at the sky. The courtyard was very quiet. White Emperor City was also very quiet. Only the sea of clouds was roiling, tearing apart, spraying snowflakes onto the earth. The entire world was constantly changing between black and white, but not for a single moment did it turn gray. The sky and the earth seemed to fuse together. An extremely thick bolt of lightning struck the distant west. The summit of an unknown hill was flattened. The stream outside the courtyard was frozen, no longer making any sound. The thunder did not stop, nor did the snow. After some time, a crack finally appeared in the depths of the sea of clouds and then spread to either side. Sunlight spilled through the crack, spreading wider and wider until it enveloped White Emperor City once more. The sea of clouds gradually collapsed, sending down wisps of snowflakes. The cold clouds descended upon the Imperial City and Heaven's Guard Pavilion, flowing down the stairway to heaven like a waterfall. The waterfall reached the lower part of the city, exited through the city gate, and ultimately entered the Red River, leaving no trace behind. There was no trace in the blue sky or White Emperor City, not a single cloud. In the stone hall at the highest point of the Imperial City, Luoluo stood in front of the window, looking at the snow, her face covered in tears. The White Emperor returned to that street. He looked up at the sky. There were no longer any clouds there, but snow was still falling. The snow seemed to come from nothing. Everything was so empty. Shang Xingzhou walked to his side and asked, "How many years have we been friends?" The White Emperor replied, "Several hundred years." Shang Xingzhou added, "When you chose her, your father opposed it, I opposed it, and the ministers also opposed it." The White Emperor gave a self-deprecating laugh. Today, Jin Yilu was still talking about this matter. Shang Xingzhou looked at him and asked, "So what do you think now? Are you saying that I won't regret it?" The White Emperor was quiet for a very long time. Finally, he said, "That's a senseless thought that only you humans and demons have." If it really was a senseless thought, why did he need to be quiet for so long, to think about it for so long? The mountains had no hills, the rivers ran dry. The winter thunder shook the rain and snow. The heavens and earth became one, only dared to part with the sovereign. This was a final farewell. The grief-stricken could only part. And this was a final farewell. But was everything really going to end here? Those dissipating clouds, those still falling snow, were all her, so cold and wet that it was rather irritating. The White Emperor suddenly lowered his head and began to cough. To be continued. Chapter 220. There are many reasons for coughing, but the most common one is illness. Cold qi injured the lungs and lingered about. Even an expert of the divine domain would find it very troublesome. Shang Xingzhou did not know that Emperor Bai would continue coughing like this for many years to come. But he knew that Emperor Bai had suffered serious injuries, just like himself. Whether it was the two angels or Madame Mu, they were all extremely powerful opponents. He and Emperor Bai were the strongest in the world, but they had to pay a certain price. At this time, he could have chosen to do something, but he did not because of this reason, and also because he knew that Chun Changsheng and Su Yurong would not support him. His and the White Emperor's wills could constantly change as the situation changed, but the young man and woman would not. He said to the White Emperor, "But it still came to this day. She has great talent, a good bloodline, ability, intelligence, and beauty. If she marries with me, we can give birth to the most outstanding offspring." The White Emperor said, "For this, I can endure many things, including her ambition, but I did not expect her ambition to be so great." Shang Xingzhou understood what he meant. If Madame Mu had only wanted to seek some benefits for the great Western continent, the White Emperor would have maintained a silence. But her recent actions had involved the survival of the demi-human race. Actually, I always knew she looked down on me. She always thought I was a monster who didn't understand art. The White Emperor indifferently said, "None of this matters. I can still endure her, but I can't endure it like Bianghong. Most importantly, Luoluo is the next White Emperor that I have chosen. You should also be well aware of just how pure and powerful her bloodline is. Just because the great Western continent wants her to be married off to Xiuelao City, she's crazy." Shang Xingzhou said, "This is what I don't understand about you the most in this whole matter. The child at her belly is also your descendant. The White Emperor said with an indifferent expression, when it comes to children, it has never been about quantity, but quality. One outstanding child like Luo is enough. What use is there in giving birth to more trash? Since ancient times, the number of people in our clan has been extremely small. Not everyone is like that emperor of yours, giving birth to so many sons and letting them kill each other. Whoever survives in the end will inherit the throne. What was this? Raising poisonous insects? You humans really don't know what's good for you sometimes. The emperor in these words naturally referred to the mighty Emperor Taizong. Shang Xingzhou said, "If that's the case, why do you need to do this? That year in the snowy plains to the north of Mount Han, you borrowed my hand to heavily wound the demon lord and also delayed me for 5 years." Emperor Bai looked at Shang Xingzhou with a deep gaze. "These 5 years are enough for you to do far too many things. You actually managed to wrest back the authority of the human race from Tianhai's hands. I can't help but ponder a question. If Xiulao City is destroyed and you unite the world, what will my race do then? Therefore, I can only try to delay your pace." Shang Xingzhou calmly replied, "I am not Emperor Taizong. I do not have the ability to defy the heavens and change fate. All of you have overestimated me." Bai Di said, "You are my friend. I know how terrifying you are. Moreover, you have taught 2 good students." Shang Xingzhou didn't answer, saying, "So you set up this trap?" These were the same words he had said before. What was the point of doing all this? That means everything. This was the White Emperor's city. Everything that happened in this city had to be approved by him, or tacitly approved, or even pushed in the dark. Whether it was Madame Mu's deeds or the Xiang clan leader's deeds, whether they were good or evil, like the heavenly selection ceremony, or the dangers that Qin Changsheng had once faced, or this trap, or the deaths of Biyang Hong and Wuqiong Bai, or that most important of all, the White Emperor's refusal to marry Luo to Xiulao City did not mean that he had not thought about allying with the demons at the very beginning. You used your daughter as a bargaining chip to have the 2 sides fight, but you watched from the sidelines. No matter what the result was, as long as you came out and made a rallying cry, it would be complete. Shang Xingzhou continued, "People like us who have lived for too long have too much time to think about problems, so our plans naturally won't have too many loopholes. But you did not expect Qin Changsheng to arrive so early and change the entire course of the situation. Moreover, he was so determined to dig you out of that mountain." The White Emperor said, "I said before that you taught 2 good students, and you've also arrived." Shang Xingzhou replied, "How could I not personally attend such a major event?" The White Emperor knew that the major event he spoke of was not merely the demi-human race's intention to ally with Xiulao City, but also the 2 angels of sacred light. To people like him and Shang Xingzhou, who stood at the apex of the continent, the truly major events could only be matters beyond this world. They were both people who walked the great Tao, and their Tao was the Tao of this side. To use Wang Zhizhi's words, positions were relative, so one stance was naturally predetermined. The actions of the demons had already touched their bottom line. It probably has nothing to do with the demon lord. The White Emperor said, "Only madmen like her in black robe would do such a thing." Shang Xingzhou replied, "Women are all madmen, so they can't be allowed to stand too high." Many years ago, he had opposed the marriage between the White Emperor and Madame Mu precisely because of this consideration. Similarly, he held the same view of the Tianhai Divine Empress. "So I did not expect that you would be willing to ask Su Yurong for help." The White Emperor added, "She is also a woman, and the fiancée of your student." Shang Xingzhou replied, "Defeating you is an extremely difficult task." "Correct. In the end, I still lost to you and your disciple." The White Emperor added, "This makes me feel more and more that those words are reasonable." He was naturally referring to the words that were currently circulating throughout the continent. One temple in Xining rules the world. The word rule in these words could be understood as ruling, but could also be understood as ruling submission. If Shang Xingzhou and his 2 students worked together, they could rule all sorts of disobedience. If I remember correctly, you said these words before entering seclusion. Correct. You've never admitted defeat. Shang Xingzhou calmly said. Then once I exterminate the demons, how are you prepared to face me? I truly was very worried in the past, but I'm a little better now, because before you can return to White Emperor City, you first have to defeat that good student of yours. The White Emperor continued. I've realized that your student is even more outstanding than I imagined. It's truly very difficult for you to accomplish this. Just as Shang Xingzhou had said, powerful figures like them who had immersed themselves in the passage of time only needed to calculate, and they would be able to come up with a plan. Luoluo would become the next White Emperor, so as long as Chun Changsheng remained on the throne, no matter how powerful the human race became, the demi-human race would be safe. Madame Mu had once said to Luoluo that this relationship between master and disciple was not firm. Only if Chun Changsheng was willing to marry Luoluo could she be at ease. The White Emperor did not believe this. He was very sure that it was precisely because Chun Changsheng could not marry Luoluo that he would treat her better. This was not because he could not ask for it, but because he felt sorry for her and the joy of being adored and loved. This was an incomparably intense desire to protect her. Of course, the prerequisite for all this was that Chun Changsheng could not be killed by Shang Xingzhou, nor could he lose power. You have such a high opinion of that good-for-nothing student of mine? This was the first time in their conversation that Shang Xingzhou had acknowledged Chun Changsheng as his student. In truth, everything stems from your attitude toward him. The White Emperor calmly said, if you did not regard him so highly, why would the world regard him so highly in the first place? Shang Xingzhou asked, and if this regard is not what you think it means? The White Emperor replied, then we'll talk about it when the time comes. Moreover, if someone is willing to promise me even more in the future, I can naturally change my mind. Shang Xingzhou said nothing more and left the street. Chun Changsheng had been watching this entire time. He watched Shang Xingzhou's back vanish into the crowd, saying nothing. Back then, on the divine path of the Mausoleum of Books, he had carried the Tianhai Divine Empress's body down, while Shang Xingzhou had walked up. They had passed each other without a word or glance. He had not said anything at the time, and he had not mentioned this matter since, but he had actually found it rather difficult to bear. Today, Shang Xingzhou had glanced at him twice, but he still felt this way. Shang Xingzhou looked at him like he was looking at a stranger. Two hands landed on Chun Changsheng's shoulders one after another. It was not a burden, but a comfort. Chun Changsheng smiled at Tang 36, then turned to Su Yurong and said, I'm fine. The snowy plains in the middle of winter were as cold as the abyss. The air exhaled by the demon beasts was quickly frozen into crystals. The wind was fierce, but there was not a shred of warmth. Black Robe calmly gazed to the west and suddenly said, It lost. At these words, the nearby mountain-toppling fiend let out a pained roar. It was not because the mountain-toppling fiend understood its words and knew that the most important plan the demons had worked on in the last few years had been destroyed, but because the demon commander sitting on its head had angrily snapped off one of its horns. Behind Black Robe and the demon commander were 10-some demon generals, and even further away were several massive and mysterious figures shrouded in black fog. The demons had not sent reinforcements to White Emperor City for several reasons. Black Robe's confidence in the powerful fighting power of the Angel of Sacred Light and his grasp of the situation in the capital was also because there was not enough time. But the most important reason was a person. A middle-aged scholar stood in the snowy plains. The most famous scholar in the world since ancient times. Wang Jitsa. I didn't think that he would even invite you. Now that I think about it, it was probably Daoist Ji who put in a lot of effort that allowed you to escape little Jie's killing intent. The cold wind blew, revealing Black Robe's slightly green face, but his voice was devoid of emotion. Upon hearing this long-lost name, Wang Jitsa sighed. Has the wind and snow of several centuries still not been able to wash away your hatred? The long-lost 3,000 words. To be continued. Chapter 221. The surname Jie was Emperor Taizong's old name in Tianliang County. Ever since the descent of the heavenly tome monoliths, no one had ever surpassed this man's status in history. Thus, on this continent, whether in life or in death, He had always enjoyed the highest honor and the greatest respect. Whether it was the common people of the human race or the demi-human race, not even those demon dukes in Shualao City who hated him to the bone would directly call him by his name. But today, Black Robe did, and he even added the word child to the end. Anyone could hear the bone-deep hatred he felt for Emperor Taizong. If time can make us forget everything of the past, what meaning is there in our existence? Black Robe jeered at Wang Jitsa. You once said that you would not concern yourself with the affairs of the world, but aren't you still unable to let it go? Wang Jitsa replied, Since you are colluding with the other race, this is no longer a matter of the world, but a matter beyond it. Black Robe asked, So what? Wang Jitsa replied, As long as you are willing to give up on this crazy idea, I am willing to do anything for you. Anything? Black Robe mocked. I've seen your shamelessness and callousness. Do you think I'll be tricked by you again? After saying this, he turned and walked toward the large city in the depths of the snowstorm. The demon commander and the demon generals followed, and the massive figures shrouded in the black fog gradually dissipated. Wang Jitsa gazed at Black Robe's back, his emotions very complex. The demon lord silently left White Emperor City. The entire process was very calm, attracting no attention. In this city, there were many human experts who wanted to kill the demon lord, but no one could touch him, because the White Emperor had clearly issued a decree. This decree was the same as Madame Mu's, with every word identical. A guess from afar. Everyone knew why this was the case. All things in the world needed a state of relative balance. In order to prevent the human race from dominating the world, the demon race could not be weakened too much. The Council of Elders maintained their silence. The officials of the demi-human court maintained their silence. And even demi-human experts like Xiaoda also maintained their silence, because this was His Majesty's will. Only Jin Yulu, just like he had several hundred years ago, engaged in an intense dispute with the White Emperor, and then was once more expelled from the imperial city. He could only continue his life of farming. Chun Chong Sheng and Tang 36 stood on the observation deck and looked into the palace. The sky was bright, but it was very dark inside the hall, so it was hard to see what was going on. They could only see the ministers, demon generals, and elders kneeling down like a tide. Tang 36 thought of the bloody battle around the courtyard, and his mood became bad. He sneered, Is this why you are right, because you are weak? Chun Chong Sheng didn't say anything, only sighed. It didn't take long for the court meeting to end. The ministers, generals, and elders filed out, bowed respectfully to Chun Chong Sheng from afar, and then dispersed. No one dared to approach and speak to him, not even the Bear Tribe leader or the Sure Tribe leader. The situation was completely different from that of a few nights ago in the Taoist church. After so many years, the White Emperor had finally returned to his city. There was no need for any schemes or tricks. The entire Yao race would be unified under his will. Moreover, the only person who could threaten the White Emperor's position, the Xiong clan leader, had died, and the Xiong clan was in a precarious situation. Chun Chong Sheng and Tang 36 walked into the palace. There was no seat arranged for Chun Chong Sheng, but Tang 36 could not say anything disrespectful, because the White Emperor also did not sit. How is your grandfather's health? The White Emperor asked Tang 36. No matter how much he silently criticized him, Tang 36's responses were very calm and appropriate. There was nothing to nitpick about in his etiquette or demeanor. But in the end, he couldn't help but say something. I don't even understand. He's already so old, so why does he still like to stir up trouble? These words were clearly directed at the Tang Old Master, but the target of their ridicule was the White Emperor. The White Emperor ignored him and said a few words to Chun Chong Sheng. The meaning of these words was very simple, and they were all within his expectations. He was just recalling the once close and excellent relationship between the two sides, and then he hoped that it could continue to be maintained. Finally, the White Emperor said, On Holy Maiden Peak, you and Zheshio killed that fellow. Very good. With these words, the conversation came to an end. An attendant led Chun Chongsheng and Tang 36 to Luolua's palace. Chun Chongsheng thought about those last words, somewhat confused. Tang 36 explained. He was talking about the white tiger divine general. That fellow is also very bold and ambitious, actually daring to use the white tiger as his title. If the two races were not allies, he would have been killed by the white emperor long ago. It's not convenient for the white emperor to act, so he should be very happy that you killed that person for him. When they arrived at the highest stone hall, Chun Changsheng saw the figure by the railing. He was rather surprised, but he still went into the stone hall. Tang 36 naturally would not follow. He walked toward the beautiful figure by the railing. The stone hall was not simple. Its round windows and ebony partitions cut the space into an extremely beautiful painting. Luo Luo stood in this painting like a cold and pretty little white flower in a pot. Her face was pale, her expression miserable, and she looked very pitiful. It was not only because of her mother's heartlessness and death, or perhaps because of the parting that was coming, but also because of many other things. Chun Changsheng stood in front of her in silence for a very long time. Suddenly, he asked, "Do you want to come with me?" Luo Luo lowered her head in silence. Drip, drip, drip. This was the sound of tears falling on the ground. After a while, she raised her head and used her sleeve to wipe away the tears on her face. She revealed a sincere smile and said, "Teacher, there's no need." If Chun Changsheng had not asked if he wanted to go with her, but if he wanted to go with her, then perhaps she would have let him go. The former was a question, asking for her opinion. The latter was an order. As a student, how could she disobey her teacher's will? What a pity. She very naturally leaned into Chun Changsheng's embrace. Just like before, Chun Changsheng didn't know where to put his hand. Seeing the tear stains on that small face, the brilliant smile, and the purest eyes, he thought of many scenes. The mottled rain on the walls of the Orthodox Academy, the brilliant twilight on the great banyan tree, and the purest lake. His hand fell, but it was somewhat different from before. This time his hand fell on her back. After a very long time, Chun Changsheng still did not come out. Tang 36 couldn't help but look to his side again. Su Yurong did not pay attention to him, nor did she turn around to look at the palace. This was the highest point of the imperial city, even higher than the observation platform. She could clearly see the observation platform from the railing. She knew that there used to be a pear tree there. She also knew how touching the scene of a pear blossom in tears was. Not long ago, she saw it with her own eyes. That young face was full of tears. Who wouldn't feel pity for it? Tang 36 couldn't help but say. Su Yurong said expressionlessly, "Shut up." Tang 36 was a little angry and said. Su Yurong slightly raised her eyebrows and said, "I feel pity for him even when I see him." Chapter 222. This is the last chapter of this volume. I have something to do tomorrow, and then I have to sort out the plot of the next volume, which is also the last volume, so there won't be any updates. This volume was well written. In terms of the overall plot, I like the part about the Wunshui Tangs the most. It was written with the wuxia style that I liked. In the past, when Ruyan wrote about Xiao Qiushui, as well as when he wrote about heroes later on, he was most curious about what kind of place the Tang family was. He was curious about what kind of people the Tang Old Master and Old Madam Tang looked like. In the end, he waited for more than 20 years, but he still did not see any of them. He probably would not be able to see them either. The Tang family I wrote about was, of course, different from the Tang family in the wuxia novels, especially the Tang family written by Wen Ruyan. The Tang family in the novels was more like the masterminds behind the scenes in those conspiracy theories. In terms of viewing effects, my favorite was, of course, Su Yurong and Chun Changsheng's twin sword harmony after coming out of seclusion. Some readers did not understand why the Having Blade needed two people to be together. My explanation was that this wasn't a Having Blade. It was a very complicated structure. Secondly, their realms and talents were actually not as good as Zhou Xian's. The most important reason was that he really wanted to write harmonious swords. Back then, when I saw Zhang Danfeng and Yun Lei, I felt so good. Then, when I saw their master, I felt even better. All right, I'll control my emotions. Finally, I must say that in this volume, I wrote the best and most satisfied with the death of Biyang Hong and Wu Qiongbai. In the beginning, The love and dislike of the characters in the book are controlled and guided by oneself. In the end, it is their own charm or anti-charm. The three of them walked out of the Imperial City. After walking past the half-collapsed whale fall platform, Chun Sheng suddenly stopped. Whose child is it in her womb? Hearing this, Tang 36 thought of the silence in the hall and Su Yurong's reaction. He was shocked and instinctively prepared to run away. Su Yurong glanced at him and said, "You think too much." Chen Chongsheng also noticed the change in Tang 36's expression and shook his head helplessly. Many people had died in this battle, including Biyang Hong, Wu Qiongbai, and the two angels of sacred light. What Chen Sheng couldn't forget was a life that many people couldn't even remember. It was the child in Madame Mu's arms. As far as he was concerned, the child was the most innocent victim. Or perhaps it was because it reminded him of his past. Su Yurong understood where his question came from and explained that the White Emperor clan needed 5 years of pregnancy before they could give birth. Chen Chongsheng was stunned. He finally understood why Luo said she was the same age as him, but she looked so small. So the age she mentioned was 1 year old. Outside the Imperial City, the leader of the Bear Tribe, the leader of the Shur clan, and some other important figures of the demi-human race were waiting for them. Outside of the White Emperor's line of sight, they were very willing to express their goodwill to Chen Chongsheng and repair the relationship between the two sides. However, in the end, there were still some misgivings. Not long after, the crowd dispersed, and the front of the Imperial City became desolate. Chen Chongsheng turned his head and looked at the observation platform that was like a small black dot high up. He didn't say anything. Of course, he knew that wasn't the whole truth. During those nights when he was breaking through the formation in Starfall Mountain Range, he'd thought about a great deal, and he'd already faintly understood exactly what was going on. So when he used the South Stream Temple Sword Array to break the seal, the mountain collapsed, and the White Emperor reappeared in the world, he had immediately turned and left. Seeing that the White Emperor was still alive was just a confirmation, but he did not want to see him, much less speak to him, because he felt somewhat nauseated. The White Emperor was not dead, nor was he unconscious. On the night before the Heavenly Selection Ceremony, the Xiong clan leader had come to the Starfall Mountain Range and naturally sensed his true will. Madame Mu knew that the Xiong clan leader had faked his allegiance to her, and it was from that night that she began to suspect the White Emperor. But she did not change her mind and continued to carry out her plan. She understood the White Emperor far too well. She knew that as long as he could stay out of this matter, he would agree to her actions. But no one could have expected that Chen Chongsheng would go to the Starfall Mountain Range to rescue the White Emperor. Those nights of breaking the formation and rescuing the White Emperor had actually been a form of coercion. What compelled one was not riches and honor, but firmness and persistence. In the end, the White Emperor was forced out of the mountain range by Chen Chongsheng. Shang Xingzhou had told him the method to break the formation through Su Yurong and then Xiaoda. After seeing all living beings, the White Emperor had to make a decision. Based on this, he truly had lost to the master and disciple, Shang Xingzhou and Chen Chongsheng. Tang 36 recalled the sight of the Li Palace's grand array being destroyed, thought of the demon lord walking out of the darkness and the angel of sacred light in the sky, and said with lingering fear, "Fortunately, all the schemes failed in the end, or else I really don't know what sort of conclusion awaited us." Chen Chongsheng said nothing. He did not agree with Tang 36's view. Who can say that the White Emperor was truly defeated? The demon race lost 2 angels of sacred light, and the human race similarly lost 2 experts of the divine domain. Shang Xingzhou suffered significant injuries. The Xiong clan leader was unjustly killed. The Xiong clan was destroyed, and the Council of Elders was severely weakened. In the next 200 years, no one in the demi-human domain could threaten him, and the relationship between Chen Chongsheng and Luo could no longer be torn apart. Once she succeeded to the throne, the demi-humans would no longer have to worry about the threat of the human race. And for so many benefits, he only needed to pay the price of a wife. Su Yurong paused, then added, and he didn't like it. Tang 36 suddenly felt the wind get colder and colder. Only then did he realize that he was already out of the city gate at the ferry on the shore. Xin Yuan Pa, the people of the Tang clan, and the priests of the orthodoxy had been waiting here for a very long time. The howling cold wind on the river turned everyone's breaths into pillars of frost. The scene was rather spectacular. After the blizzard, the temperature of White Emperor City had not risen. The wind came from the river, but it actually came from the western sea on the other side of the mountains. The west wind was as cold as an icy blade, but made people's faces flush and heat up like the strongest wine. Chun Changsheng turned his head back to the imperial city, thinking of the last few days, of the people in this story, of the White Emperor and Madame Mu. Will we really become this kind of people? By the lake in the Orthodox Academy and by the riverbank in Wenshui City a few days ago, he had asked this question. In the past, Tang 36 would always give a very clear answer, but today he was silent. Chun Changsheng thought of Biyang Hong and Wu Qiongbai, and then he thought of another important question. If your wife treats you extremely well, but has an extremely bad personality and is even a great villain, what will you do? This question had been raised by Biyang Hong. Xin Yuan Po thought of those days, his expression a little gloomy. Su Yurong calmly gazed at him and asked, "If it were you, what would you do?" Chun Changsheng very seriously thought this over, then replied, "I would advise you, stop you from continuing your evil ways, and guard your side for the rest of your life." Tang 36 asked, just like Biyang Hong. Chun Changsheng thought it over, then shook his head. "I can't do it." Su Yurong replied, "I also don't want it." Tang 36 asked, "If it were you encountering this problem?" Su Yurong thought for a while, then said, "I would kill him, and then I would follow him in death." This answer, especially this kind of casual feeling, made Xin Yuan Pa, who was about to speak, so scared that he didn't dare to open his mouth. Truly worthy of being a child taught by the divine empress. Tang 36 sighed, then changed the topic. "I think there's something wrong with all of you." Surprised, Chun Changsheng asked, "What do you think we should do? All of you say that I'm like Su Li, so my style of doing things is naturally of that school." Tang 36 replied, "What can we do?" "Do nothing. Isn't it fun to be great evildoers together?" Chun Changsheng felt that these words were very inappropriate. Just when he was about to say something, he suddenly heard the lively sounds of ceremonial music in the distance. This music was very cheerful, and one could even hear the occasional firecrackers. Some family was probably holding a wedding. So many things had happened, and Madame Mu had just died. Anyone who dared to hold a wedding at this time was either extremely stupid or extremely powerful. The family holding the wedding today belonged to neither of these two categories. No one had come to stop them because this family was holding a wedding and the officiator had a rather special status. Xin Yuan said to Tang 36, "The officiator was originally the principal, but now I'm taking his place." Chun Changsheng replied, "I'm in a hurry to leave." The Archbishop of the Western Wastes and several cardinals had also come to bid farewell, preparing to attend the wedding. Tang 36 was even more confused at this situation, thinking, just what is going on here? Xin Yuan Pa explained the story to him. The two getting married today were a young man and woman who had been watching the heavenly selection ceremony in front of the imperial city a few days ago. The young man was a Bear Tribe laborer from the lower city's pine paths, while the young woman was a noble lady from the upper city. Logically speaking, given the vast difference in status, they should have never gotten to know each other, much less gotten married. The problem was that on that day, Chun Changsheng had engaged in a fierce battle with the demon lord on the observation platform, causing a massive rock to collapse from the whale fall platform. At the final moment, the Bear Tribe laborer had protected the noble lady. Even so, they would still have died, just like those several hundred people on the plaza who had not been able to escape in time. Fortunately, Chun Changsheng's group of swords had chopped the rock into powder, and a beautiful snowfall had fallen in front of the imperial city. No one had died, and the emotion quickly transformed into love, surpassing many other things to bring about today's wedding. They all say that it might have something to do with me proposing the marriage. Xin Yuan said, but I feel that the woman's family has a very good attitude. The people in the tribe are overthinking it. Tang 36 said, if you weren't the one representing the husband's family to propose, would the woman's family have a good attitude? Speaking of which, why did you get involved in this matter? Xin Yuanpe replied, we're all tribesmen, and Huji's beef buns are really delicious. I forgot to mention, the groom is a helper at the Huji's bun shop. On that day, if he hadn't risked his life to throw out the shopkeeper and the chef, we wouldn't have been able to eat these buns anymore. Tang 36 laughed. That's too exaggerated. What kind of bun could be so delicious? Chen Changsheng did not laugh. He seriously said, that bun really is delicious. The Huji's bun shop in the Pine Paths was not far from the Celestial Tree Temple, so it was naturally not far from Xin Yuanpe's home. Biang Hong had loved the buns from this shop, but alas, he had not been able to eat a hot one until his death. The mood became rather gloomy. Tang 36 had heard Chen Changsheng speak of Biang Hong's death and vaguely understood. Xin Yuanpe bid farewell to Chen Changsheng and the others. Chen Changsheng said, let's meet again when we return to the Orthodox Academy. Xin Yuanpe nodded and walked with the bishops to the place where the ceremonial music was being played. Chen Changsheng fell quiet for a while as he watched the firecrackers fly through the air, then said, it's a good thing. Yes, there are still many good things in the world. Tang 36 said, this being the case, who says that we'll definitely become people like the White Emperor couple? Su Yurong gave a faint smile, saying nothing. As the rays of the sun shone down, the temperature finally rose. The west wind gradually warmed, no longer as cold and fierce as before. With a cry, the white crane left the ground. The snow trembled as a black-clothed girl landed on the shore. Confused, she asked, why are you in such a rush to leave? Because Chen Changsheng had received a letter. It was a letter from the capital. Someone in the capital was about to get married. He was invited to attend the wedding, and he was also asked to preside over the wedding. Chen Changsheng could choose not to participate in the wedding in White Emperor City, but he had to participate in the wedding in the capital. And he knew that whether he was willing or not, he could not escape from this task. Just like back then, whether he was willing or not, she had still climbed into his bed. End of the 6th volume, to be continued. Chapter 223. After Zhong Hui succeeded in comprehending the monolith, he disappeared without a trace, only leaving behind a sentence of leaving first and Chen Changsheng, who was standing on the mountain path. In the eyes of others, Chen Changsheng's current figure was somewhat lonely, although he himself didn't feel this way. The crowd looked at him and thought with slight mockery. The stone tablets of the mausoleum of books really were fair. No one could be lucky forever. Some people thought this wasn't enough. They still wanted to sprinkle salt on Chen Changsheng's wounds. The scholar from Scholarly Manor in front of the monolith hut looked at him and sneered. Senior's words before he left were spoken indifferently, but in my opinion, they were a bit too modest. Although he was only a step ahead, with this step, the difference is more than 1,000 li. This sentence was meant to mock Chen Changsheng, but it also included Gohan Shi. Guan Fei raised his eyebrows and was about to explode, but he still couldn't beat Tang 36. He looked at the scholar from Scholarly Manor and mocked. Why don't you leave first? Where is he going? To reincarnate? Why are you in such a hurry? The scholar from Scholarly Manor was infuriated by these words, and Ji Jin's complexion instantly darkened. His fingers stiffened, and he almost pulled out a strand of his beard. Mr. Nianguang and the other monument guardians walked over from the crowd. They looked at Tang 36 and shouted in a deep voice, don't be rude. If this continues, no one will be able to protect you. Tang 36 looked at him and sneered. I told you last night I can't hit you. What can you do to me? Mr. Nianguang solemnly said, we monolith guardians have the responsibility of maintaining order when viewing the monoliths. If you continue to cause trouble, I will personally send a letter to the Academy and ask the Orthodoxy to expel you from the Mausoleum of Books. Tang 36 looked at him as if he was looking at an idiot. He pointed at Chen Changsheng, who was beside him, and said, you really are a group of muddle-headed old people. Do you know who he is? In the Imperial Palace, in front of thousands of people, His Holiness the Pope had held his hand. Countless people in the capital had suspected that he was the illegitimate son of the bishop. Proposed to the orthodoxy? The Li Palace will listen to you. I'll cut off my head for you. Mr. Nianguang was infuriated by these words and shouted, "If the Li Palace is truly so protective, I will definitely have the academy demand an explanation." Tang 36 was also angry and shouted, "Your school? You should ask the bishops who gives the temple seminary a third of its annual budget. The reason you were able to eat and wait for death in the mausoleum of books for so many years is all because of my family's support. You disobeyed the orthodoxy's orders to protect Chun Chong Sheng, disobeyed temple seminary's interest to protect me, yet you want to stand up for the Southerners, and even came to scare me. What sort of reasoning is this?" Nianguang was so angry that his entire body was shaking. He pointed at him and wanted to scold him, but in the end, he just waved his sleeves angrily and left. The area around the monolith hut was completely silent. Whether it was the newcomers that had entered the mausoleum this year or the old people that had entered the mausoleum in the past, they all stared at Tang 36 in a daze, wondering just what kind of person he was. Because Zhong Hui was the first to comprehend the tablets, Tang 36 was in a bad mood. He looked at the crowd and yelled, "What are you looking at? I've never seen such a rich person. The Wenshui Tangs, are they really that rich?" Guan Feibai and the other two looked at each other, speechless. They had all been born into poverty, and their years of cultivation in the Mount Li Sword sect were extremely austere. Even though Qi Jian was the beloved last disciple, raised by the sect master as a child, he had never lived a life of luxury. It was truly hard to imagine that such a person existed in this world. In terms of money, the youths of Mount Li were truly ignorant. Speaking of which, Tang Tang is so rich and has always been so arrogant. Why isn't he particularly annoying? Qi Jian asked, somewhat puzzled. Guan Feibai remembered how the girls of the 13 divisions of Radiant Green and Holy Maiden Peak looked at Tang 36 passionately. Perhaps there was a reason, but he couldn't say it in front of his junior. At this moment, a youngster walked towards them. Guan Feibai and the other two greeted him and smiled. It was obvious that they were familiar with each other, especially Liang Ban, who was usually very dull, actually took the initiative to greet him. He even patted the youngster's shoulder, seeming to be very intimate. Gohan Shi introduced him to Chun Chong Sheng. "This is my third junior, Liang Xiao Xiao." Chun Chong Sheng now knew that this youngster was the third law of the Divine State's 7 laws, Liang Xiao Xiao. Liang Xiao Xiao had always been ranked third on the proclamation of Azure Clouds. It wasn't until this year that he was pushed down to 4th by Luo Luo. Chun Chong Sheng knew his name because he was first upon the first banner in last year's grand examination. Thinking about how this person was standing in the crowd, and no one noticed him, he felt that what Ji Jin and Zhong Hui said last night was very reasonable. In a place like the Mausoleum of Books where heroes gathered, first upon the first banner in the grand examination was indeed not special. Liang Xiao Xiao greeted Chun Chong Sheng with an indifferent expression, as if he didn't like to talk. Then he looked towards Gohan Shi and said, "Senior, 2 days ago I was meditating in front of the East Pavilion monolith, so I didn't have the time to find you." Gohan Shi said, "Of course, viewing the monoliths and cultivating is more important. Since we've come to the Mausoleum of Books, there will be a time to meet." Chun Chong Sheng remembered that Gohan Shi had said yesterday that he would introduce someone to him. Now that he thought about it, it should be this youngster. Qi Jian heard the words, "East Pavilion Monolith," and said in surprise, "East Pavilion Monolith, that's the 6th monolith. 3rd senior, you're really amazing." Liang Xiao nodded his head slightly. Although his name had the word Xiao in it, his face didn't have the slightest hint of a smile. He seemed to be even colder and more arrogant than Guan Feibai. Gohan Shi looked at him and smiled. "Since you've already seen the East Pavilion monolith, breaking through the realm isn't something that happened recently." Liang Xiao said to Gohan Shi respectfully, "Half a year ago I entered Ethereal Opening and then I didn't make any progress. I'm very ashamed, so I didn't send a letter back." Liang Ban, who laughed honestly, That's enough. Gohan Shi said to Chun Chong Sheng, "3rd junior and 5th junior are twins. Tang 36's gaze moved back and forth between Liang Xiao and Liang Banhu's faces. He asked confusedly, "Why does fifth brother look older than third brother?" Liang Xiao heard this and turned his head, giving him a cold stare. Tang 36 stared back. Qi Jian said, "Third senior, he's just this kind of person. Just ignore him." Liang Xiao really didn't pay attention to Tang 36 and turned around. Zhishou looked at Qi Jian with a strange expression. Qi Jian felt his gaze, and as if he had been stung by a scorpion, he quickly hid behind Liang Banhu. Gohan Sure explained a few words, and Chun Changsheng realized that the fifth law, Liang Banhu, was the older brother. Liang Xiao, who was ranked higher, was actually the younger brother. Then he remembered that Liang Xiao had previously said that he broke through half a year ago. Only then did he realize that this person had already entered ethereal opening. If that's the case, when he leaves the mausoleum of books, he will leave the proclamation of azure sky and enter the proclamation of golden distinction. Please tell Princess Luluo that I won't be fourth on the proclamation of azure sky. Liang Xiao looked at Chun Changsheng with an indifferent expression. Then, without waiting for Chun Changsheng to respond, without waiting for Tang 36 to speak, he turned to Gohan Sure and sternly said, "Senior, although we in Scholarly Manor are both from the south, Mount Li is still Mount Li. How can we fall behind others?" Gohan Sure said, "I have my own score. You should meditate and observe the monolith. You only have 1 month before leaving the mausoleum. You should treasure your time." Liang Xiao said no more. Just as he had said, although the ranking on the monolith in front of the mausoleum of books had long since been destroyed by Zhou Tong sent by the Divine Empress, things like competitiveness or glory could not be forcefully erased from people's hearts. The speed at which one comprehended the monoliths, as well as the number of heavenly tome monoliths comprehended in the end, were still in corporeal rankings in people's hearts. This year, there was no peerless genius that comprehended the reflecting monolith on the first day, and no one was able to successfully comprehend the monolith on the second day. However, Zhong Hui was able to comprehend the monolith on the morning of the third day, which was already quite good. At this time, the monolith viewers that had entered the mausoleum of books in previous years already knew of Chun Changsheng and Gohan Shure's identities. They knew that they were this year's first and second place in the grand examination. Moreover, the discussions outside the mausoleum had already spread to this place. The reputation of the two being well-versed in the Taoist canon was extremely well known, so it naturally attracted a lot of attention. Even now, the two of them still had no way of comprehending the first heavenly tome monolith, which inevitably led to some discussion. After Wang Jitze, the only people who dared to claim to be well-versed in the Taoist canon were these two. I didn't think that today they would actually be defeated by a scholar from Scholarly Manor. Rumors are often untrue. What well-versed in the Taoist canon, reaching ethereal opening at a young age. Looking at it now, I'm afraid that those rumors were a bit exaggerated. The monolith viewers went to their respective monoliths to comprehend. Liang Xiao had also left. The crowd in front of the reflecting monolith gradually dispersed, and the mountain forest gradually became quiet. Chun Changsheng walked to the front of the monolith hut and looked at the black monolith. After a long period of silence, he suddenly asked, "How did he disappear? Could it be that behind the heavenly tome monoliths is a miniature world?" Tang 36 and the others saw that he was silently viewing the monoliths and thought that he was thinking about something important. Who would have thought that he was actually thinking about this question? They could not help but be speechless. Gohan Sure said, "It's said that the heavenly tome monoliths are fragments of some miniature world. Now, they're scattered in the real world. The space has already been annihilated, but these fragments are still connected. It can also be understood that each monolith is a door, but this door cannot lead to other places. It can only lead to other doors, which are other heavenly tome monoliths. Moreover, the order between the monoliths will never change." Chun Changsheng said, "So that's how it is. No wonder it said that the mausoleum of books only has one path. But how can the heavenly tome monoliths determine whether the key in the hands of the monolith viewer is correct. The Taoist canons did not record how to go from one heavenly tone monolith to the next. When those sages who had once viewed the monoliths and comprehended the Tao recorded their days in the mausoleum of books, they also did not mention these details. This was because, in the eyes of cultivators, this was all common knowledge, and there was absolutely no need to explain it. Chen Changsheng knew countless obscure knowledge in the 3,000 scriptures of the Tao, but he was somewhat lacking in common knowledge regarding the world and cultivation. This was because he was self-taught. Gohan Sure said, "The heavenly tomes cannot be comprehended. The heavenly tome monoliths themselves have many mystical or incomprehensible aspects. How to determine whether the interpretation of the monolith inscriptions is correct can never be determined by the cultivator themselves. Neither the monolith viewer nor the spectator can do this. Only the heavenly tome monoliths can determine it themselves." Determine it themselves? Chen Changsheng did not understand and repeated. Gohan Sure said, "The monolith viewer is in contact with the heavenly tome monoliths. If the heavenly tome monoliths feel that you understand, then you truly understand." Chen Changsheng thought of the famous description of the heavenly Tao in the Taoist canons. Profound within profound, the door of all wonders. If the heavenly tome monoliths were a door, then what sort of world of wonders was behind the door? Seeing his pensive appearance in front of the monolith, Tang 36 and the others continued to be speechless. Zhong Hui had already comprehended the first heavenly tome monolith, but he was still interested in these minor details. Could it be that he was not anxious? Chen Changsheng suddenly thought of something and said, "I have to hurry back." Tang 36 asked in surprise, "What is it?" Chen Changsheng was somewhat anxious. He said, "You dragged me out in such a hurry that I forgot the stove was still boiling water. What if it dries up?" Chapter 224. Seeing Chen Changsheng's hurried figure on the mountain path, Tang 36 was somewhat confused. Zhixio was the same. His usually expressionless face now showed some doubt. He silently thought, could it be that Chen Changsheng was trying to escape from something? But thinking about the ups and downs of the Orthodox Academy in the past year, Chen Changsheng didn't seem like such a person. Gohan Sure withdrew his gaze from the mountain path, no longer thinking about Chen Changsheng's plans. He said to Qi Jian and the other two juniors, "Last night, I only let you look at Senior Sunmei's notes because I didn't want you to be distracted. After looking at the notes, you should know that there are many ways to comprehend the heavenly tome monoliths. So what do you think?" Guan Fei Bai thought for a while, then said, "In Senior Sunmei's notes, just the reflecting monolith alone has left behind over 10 different ways of thinking. After careful consideration, they're all extremely reasonable. It's just that our Mount Lee Sword sect is located in the south, so I'm still used to using my spiritual sense to comprehend the monolith's meaning. Give me some more time, and I should be able to completely comprehend this monolith." Qi Jian and Liang Ban, who also had a similar opinion, but Gohan Sure said, "If you can completely forget the ideas or experiences in Senior Sunmei's notes, then perhaps you can comprehend the monolith." After saying this, he naturally thought of his conversation with Chen Changsheng last night. In his view, Chen Changsheng clearly understood the principles within, which was why he chose to search for the true meaning within the changes. It was just that this method of comprehending the monolith was a bit too new. To create a new path, it really wasn't an easy matter. Guan Fei Bai and the others heard his words and were somewhat shocked. After calming their minds, they vaguely understood their senior's meaning. They walked to the front of the monolith hut, and each found a slightly flat surface to sit on. Looking at the dark monolith under the eaves, they began to silently engrave all the words in Sun Mei's notes onto the monolith, then gradually drove them out of their minds. Zhixio and Tang 36 looked at each other and followed them. Dozens of students who had just entered the mausoleum of books this year to view the monoliths also sat cross-legged in front of the monolith hut. Only Gohan Sure stood in the distance, looking at the distant mountains calmly and silently. No one knew what he was thinking. Time slowly passed, but the area in front of the monolith hut remained silent the entire time. At some point, the oil lamp hanging on the tree next to the hut had been taken away by someone. The tree branch, which had once again become relaxed, gently swayed in the spring wind. Occasionally, it would bounce off into the blue sky. Occasionally, a green leaf would fall from the branch and drift with the wind to the front of the hut. Qi Jian suddenly opened his eyes. He picked up a green leaf that had fallen on his thin shoulder, then stood up. After a moment of hesitation, he walked into the monolith hut. They, who lived in the grass hut left behind by Sun Mei, were the people that the students paid the most attention to. Otherwise, they wouldn't have the title of the Grass Hut Seven. In that silent period of time, who knew how many gazes fell on them from time to time? Seeing that Qi Jian seemed to have the intention of comprehending the monoliths, the quiet hut couldn't help but become slightly restless. Zhong Hui was the first person to comprehend the monoliths. Everyone wanted to know who would be the second. The vast majority of people believed that it would be Go Hanshi because Chun Changsheng was not present. Then if they counted down, it should be Jia Xiu or perhaps Guan Feibai or Liang Banhu, who had cultivated for a relatively longer period of time. No one would have thought that it would actually be the young Qi Jian. Qi Jian walked in front of the reflecting monolith and turned his head to glance outside the monolith hut. His young and tender face was filled with uncertainty. Go Hanshi stood under a distant pine tree. He did not say anything, but a smile appeared on his face. As a result, Qi Jian also began to smile. The uncertainty on his face disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only joy. He took another step towards the reflecting monolith, then carefully extended his right hand and placed it on the edge of the monolith. He did not touch any of the lines on the surface of the monolith. A cool breeze blew over from the cliff behind the monolith, causing the hair by Qi Jian's face to gently flutter. It swept across his clear and elegant features, and then he disappeared from where he was standing. There was a deathly stillness in front of the monolith hut. The sounds of discussion that had just occurred disappeared without a trace, just like Qi Jian's thin and small figure. The second person to pass through the reflecting monolith had just so casually appeared. Before the crowd had time to recover from their shock, they saw Guan Feibai stand up and walk towards the monolith hut. Compared to Qi Jian, this divine state's four laws, who were famous for being cold and arrogant, was truly casual, even if he was facing the divine, heavenly tome monoliths. His right hand landed on the reflecting monolith. He did not even glance at where his hand had landed. It was as if he had very casually patted the railing, preparing to chat about today's weather. There was another cool breeze, a flash of clear light, and then it disappeared. His figure also disappeared. What caused those people in front of the monolith hut who were still bitterly pondering the true meaning of the monolith inscriptions to be incomparably shocked and even somewhat helpless was that Liang Ban who also stood up and walked towards the monolith hut. This disciple of the divine state's 7 laws, who was the most low-key and also the most taciturn, first carefully tidied up his clothes, then respectfully bowed. Only then did he very seriously place his hand on the monolith. Without any pause, without any interval, the 3 disciples of the Mount Li Sword sect successively comprehended the reflecting monolith and proceeded to the second heavenly tome monolith. After a moment of silence, several sighs arose in front of the monolith hut. The sighs were filled with envy, but also with despair. The talent of cultivators was truly different. The Mount Li Sword sect was truly exceptional. Compared to Zhong Hui's breakthrough of the reflecting monolith in the morning, the 3 disciples of the Mount Li Sword sect did not have such a large entourage. They also did not have any seniors of the sect standing guard at the side, nor did they break into ethereal opening. They only stood up in a very ordinary manner, walked into the hut, and then disappeared from everyone's eyes. This was truly doing as one wished. Of the 4 people who had entered the Mount Li Sword sect, only Go Hanshi was still standing. Many people subconsciously looked towards him, feeling that it was somewhat strange. His cultivation and knowledge far surpassed his 3 junior brothers, so why was his speed at comprehending the monolith slower than his 3 junior brothers? Some people guessed at something. Seeing Go Hanshi finally leave the pine tree and walk towards the monolith, They confirmed that their guesses were not wrong. Gohanshi walked in front of the reflecting monolith. He did not close his eyes to meditate, nor did he look at the lines on the monolith. He continued to look at the distant mountain, and then his right hand descended. The cool breeze rose again, and the birds in the forest flapped their wings and flew away. His figure had already disappeared from the hut. Only now did everyone understand that Gohanshi had long since comprehended the reflecting monolith. He had only been waiting for his 3 junior brothers. In other words, as long as he was willing, wouldn't he be able to easily become the first person to comprehend the monolith in this year's Mausoleum of Books? Everyone thought back to the morning when Zhong Hui had successfully comprehended the monolith, and the excitement and pride on the faces of the people of Scholartree Manor, and they could not help but feel that this scene was rather embarrassing. At this moment, the 2 young scholars from Scholartree Manor that remained in front of the hut had truly become embarrassed. Gohanshi had been able to comprehend the monolith without going because he wanted to be of the same sect. But what about Qin Changxing? Everyone very naturally thought of this question. Was he like Gohanshi and had long since comprehended this heavenly tone monolith? If this was the case, then who was he waiting for? Or was it as Zhong Hui had said, that he really did not have enough talent to comprehend the monolith? The sounds of discussion gradually rose, then gradually died down. Not too long after, Zhuang Huanyu arrived in front of the monolith hut. As this year's strongest student of the Heavenly Academy, many people recognized him. But for some reason, after entering the Mausoleum of Books, he had disappeared. No one knew where he went or what he was doing. Even in the morning when Zhong Hui broke through and comprehended the monolith, he did not appear. Seeing him now, everyone could not help but be somewhat surprised. Zhuang Huanyu's clothes were covered in grass and leaves, as if he had spent 2 nights in the forest. He was in a somewhat sorry state, but his expression was extremely calm. Between his brows, there was a faint sense of self-confidence. Tang 36 looked at him and said, "You didn't go to the little green forest building?" The 6 ivies were originally in the capital, and were extremely close to the Mausoleum of Books, so it was easy to obtain many conveniences. As the most famous school in the Zhou dynasty in recent years, the Heavenly Academy would naturally make proper arrangements for the students of the academy that came to comprehend the monoliths. The little green forest building was the dormitory for the Heavenly Academy in the Mausoleum of Books. The other academies, like the Temple Seminary or Star Caesar Academy, also had similar arrangements. I didn't go to the little green forest building because I didn't have the time. Zhuang Huanyu brushed off the dust and grass on his body and directly walked into the monolith hut. Tang 36 looked at his back and said, "Even if you succeed in comprehending the monolith, you can only be ranked 6th. Is there a need to go through so much trouble?" Zhuang Huanyu's right hand stopped above the monolith. He said, "But at least I'm in front of Qin Changxing now." After saying this, his right hand fell. Not long after, Su Mo stood up and walked into the monolith hut, becoming the 7th person this year to successfully comprehend the monolith. Seeing one person after another successfully comprehend the monolith, how could a proud person like Tang 36 not be anxious? Especially when Su Mo's ranking on the proclamation of Azure Clouds was already behind him. This made him even more anxious. But in the next moment, he came to his senses, slightly creased his brow, and closed his eyes, no longer thinking about these matters. His mind wandered, no longer on the monolith. For a moment, it seemed as if he was really about to fall asleep. When he woke up, dusk had already arrived. The sunset filled the sky, and the spring forest of the Mausoleum of Books was burning. He stood up and walked into the monolith hut. As he passed by Zhixiu, he said, "Tell Qin Changsheng that he doesn't need to wait for me to eat tonight." Walking in front of the monolith, he happily laughed and opened his arms to give the cold monolith a big hug. Comprehending the heavenly tone monoliths would give one an indescribable feeling. To cultivators, this kind of feeling was even more delicious than dragon marrow, even more enchanting than the stars. It was an extremely satisfying feeling. The vast majority of people who had comprehended the first heavenly tone monolith and then arrived in front of the second monolith would not become lost in it, unaware of the passage of time. Tang 36 was very clear that he had no way of resisting this intoxicating feeling. Tonight, he would definitely sleep in the embrace of the second heavenly tone monolith, accompanied by starlight. That was why he had Zhishio tell Chun Changsheng that he did not need to wait for him to eat. Just like him, Zhong Hui, Zhuang Huanyu, Qi Jian, and the others had all forgotten how to write the two words return in front of the second monolith hut. But in this world, there would always be people who stood out from the masses, people with extraordinary talent and astonishing willpower. They would not be confused by any external object. Accompanied by the sunset, Go Hanshi returned to the grass hut. Smelling the fragrance of the egg custard wafting out from a kitchen, he looked at Chun Changsheng, who was sitting on the doorstep, staring blankly at the sunset. He asked, "Just what are you waiting for? There's one more chapter." Chapter 225. Chun Changsheng rubbed his eyes, which had been burned by the sunset, and stood up from the doorsill. He said, "I'm not waiting for anything." Go Hanshi said, "Although you want to walk a path that no one has walked before, and, in your own words, that method is a bit stupid, you also said that it should be possible. Then logically, it's impossible for you to still be unable to understand the first heavenly tone monolith, because I know that your ability to comprehend is stronger than many people imagine." As the only two people in the world who dare to claim to be well-versed in the Taoist canon, he and Qin Changsheng were naturally rivals. From the Ivy League gathering to the grand examination, they competed against each other, but it was precisely because they were rivals that they truly understood each other. He saw Chun Changsheng go from a normal youth who did not know how to cultivate to ethereal opening in the rain in the education palace in only a few months. Without an extremely strong ability to comprehend, how could he have done this? Qin Changsheng thought about it and said, "I feel that the method I discussed with you last night is wrong." Go Hanshi slightly raised his eyebrows and asked, "What's wrong?" Qin Changsheng said, "I can't say what's wrong. If I follow the train of thought of comprehending the monolith inscriptions, I should be able to comprehend the heavenly tone monoliths, but I keep feeling that it's a bit strange. I keep feeling that something is missing. If I continue to comprehend it before I've completely thought it through, it'll be very hard for me to convince myself, because what I cultivate is to follow my heart." Go Hanshi said, "Could it be that you want to think of another method to comprehend the monoliths?" Qin Changsheng said, "I have this thought, but I haven't made up my mind yet." Go Hanshi frowned, thinking that changing one's path halfway was a great taboo for comprehending the monoliths. He said, "You know that this is a very dangerous thought." Qin Changsheng understood his meaning. If he continued to hesitate, the hope of comprehending the heavenly tone monoliths would become smaller and smaller. He seriously thought about it for a long time, then said, "If I really can't comprehend it, then forget it. No matter what you think, you can't be too pedantic." After saying this, Go Hanshi walked towards the house. Qin Changsheng looked at his back and said, "The egg soup is still a bit lacking. Don't be in a hurry to remove the lid." His words did not have any other meaning, but Go Hanshi understood it. He thought that perhaps his current waiting was reasonable. After a while, Zhishio returned to the grass hut. Out of the 7 people living in the grass hut, only he and Chun Changsheng had yet to successfully comprehend the monolith. Looking at the courtyard that was much colder compared to last night, his face showed hints of disgust towards himself. He asked Qin Changsheng, "Why can't I? Is there something wrong with my talent?" Qin Changsheng thought to himself, a wolf tribe youngster that didn't belong to any sect and was completely self-trained was able to make many demons tremble in fear in the cruel snowy plains, and was able to steadily defeat Guan Fei Bai and other young experts on the honor roll of Azure Clouds. Not only was there no problem with his bloodline talent, on the contrary, it was ridiculously strong. It has nothing to do with talent. What does that have to do with anything? Diligence or focus? It has nothing to do with those. It's just because. Qin Changsheng looked at him and said seriously, "You don't study enough." Zhishio was a little angry. He had been wandering the snowy plains since he was a child. How could he have had the chance to study? Chun Chong Sheng took out the notebook left behind by Sun Mei and gave it to him. It's fine if you don't study enough, but the most troublesome thing is that I've observed you and found out that you really don't like to study. You've only read the notebook left behind by seniors twice. Last night, you even fell asleep while reading it. How can this be? Zhixio's face became pale, not because of injury, but because of anger. He took the notebook and went straight into the grass hut. At 5 in the morning of the next day, Chun Chongsheng opened his eyes and used 5 breaths of time to calm his mind. Then he got out of bed and found Tang 36 sprawled on the side, snoring like thunder. Walking out of the hut, he saw that Qi Jian and the others were also sound asleep. Only then did he know that they had returned from the mausoleum of books at some unknown time last night. After washing his face and rinsing his mouth, he began to boil water and cook like he did 2 days ago. Then, he began to sweep the courtyard and repair the broken fences. Even after Tang 36 and the others had finished their breakfast and went to the mausoleum of books to view the monoliths, he still did not have any intention of leaving. His face showed no signs of anxiety, and it even seemed like he was enjoying his current life. With everyone gone and the courtyard empty, he sat back on the doorstep, opened Sun Mei's notebook, and began to read it again. Gradually, he became engrossed, and his gains increased. For the entire day, aside from cooking and cleaning, he did not leave the doorstep. Naturally, he did not even take a glance at the reflecting monolith. In the evening, Tang 36 and the others returned to the grass hut one after another. After eating, they sat around the table and began to discuss the inscriptions on the second monolith. The atmosphere was very lively. Chun Chong Sheng called Zhixio into the hut, took out the copper needles from the needle box, and began to treat him. Right now, he was only at the initial stage of determining the abnormality of the meridians. If he wanted to solve the problem that had tortured Zhixio for over 10 years, it was not something that could be done in a short period of time. After a long time, they realized that 2 people were missing from the table. Qi Jian looked at the tightly shut door, and his young face revealed an expression of reluctance. Gohan Shi wrinkled his brow and shook his head. Even he was beginning to feel that it was strange. Not wanting to agitate the 2 people in the hut, the discussion around the table stopped. Tang 36 suddenly stood up, pushed open the door, and looked at Chun Chong Sheng. Today, another 3 people passed. Chun Chong Sheng concentrated on twisting the copper needles between his fingers and said something to Zhixio in a low voice, ignoring him. Time passed day by day, and it was already the 7th day since the examinees had entered the mausoleum of books. On the 5th day, Zhixio finally passed the reflecting monolith. It was unknown whether it was because he had been reading for the past few nights. However, Chun Chong Sheng still had not succeeded in comprehending the monolith. At this point, he had set a new record. In the past, he had set an incomparably glorious record in the cultivation world, and that was being one of the youngest ethereal opening practitioners. This current record, however, was not so glorious. In all the previous grand examinations first upon the first banner, he had taken the longest time to comprehend the first heavenly tome monolith, and it was even possible that he had taken even longer. In the blink of an eye, it had been the 10th day since they had entered the mausoleum. After 5 o'clock in the morning, Chun Chong Sheng finally left the grass hut and arrived before the monolith hut. He looked at the black monolith in silence, and no one knew what he was thinking. The morning light gradually brightened, and the monolith viewers entered the mausoleum of books one after another. Arriving before the monolith hut, they saw him sitting cross-legged under the tree. At first, they were somewhat shocked, and then they felt even more emotions. In those people's eyes, one could see sympathy, pity, ridicule, and even schadenfreude. Some people avoided him from afar and walked into the monolith hut. Some people purposely brushed past him, and their footsteps seemed especially relaxed. Then, accompanied by the wind that lingered around the hut's eaves, they disappeared before the monolith. After the people in the grass hut finished their breakfast, they also came. Seeing this scene, Guan Fei wrinkled his brow, and without saying anything, he held the monolith and left. Tang 36 stood in front of him and asked, "Do you want me to accompany you?" Chun Chong Sheng raised his head, looked at him, and said seriously, "In the heavenly tone monoliths, even the shortest amount of time is extremely precious. You have to treasure it." Tang 36 was speechless. He thought to himself, "You've been a tourist and cook in the mausoleum of books for 10 days, and you still have the nerve to say such things." Zhishio said nothing, and directly sat down next to Chun Chong Sheng. Chun Chong Sheng also said nothing. The morning wind lightly brushed the treetops, and the green leaves fell on the eaves. "Thank you, it's almost time," Chun Chong Sheng sincerely said. Zhishio stood up and walked into the monolith hut. This almost time was not to say that he saw the hope of comprehending the monoliths, but to say that Zhishio was accompanying him. On the afternoon of the 12th day, the spring sun was somewhat scorching. Chun Chong Sheng sat in the monolith hut, using the eaves to block out the sun. With a slight breeze, two young people appeared in front of the monolith hut. One of them was called Guan, a brilliant disciple of Gentle Stream Temple under the jurisdiction of Holy Maiden Peak in the south. He had placed third in the grand examination 2 years ago. The other was called Moon Nu, the strongest student of the Heavenly Tao Academy before Zhuang Huanyu. He had already been comprehending the monoliths in the mausoleum of books for more than 4 years. These two people were once geniuses on the proclamation of Azure Sky. As time passed, they comprehended the monoliths for a long time and broke through to ethereal opening. Now, they had already entered the proclamation of golden distinction. The northern and southern sects had always been at odds with each other. Outside the mausoleum of books, these two people were already famous. At the beginning, they were like fire and water, but now their relationship had become rather good. "You are Chun Chong Sheng?" Munu looked at him expressionlessly and asked. 10 days ago, when Zhong Hui succeeded in comprehending the monoliths, the two of them were present, but Chun Chong Sheng did not recognize them. He only knew that they should be previous monolith viewers. "I am. What advice do you two have?" The corner of Moon Nu's lips twitched, and he gave a faint smile, but he did not reply. Guan looked at Chun Chong Sheng, shook his head, and sighed. The sect sent a letter, saying that this year's grand examination produced an extraordinary person. Now it seems that it was really an exaggeration. Munu said, "Otherwise, to be able to enter ethereal opening at the age of 15 is indeed extraordinary. It's just that at the beginning, cultivation is like a sharp blade cutting through bamboo, and afterwards is stagnant like sand and difficult to advance. There are too many people like this in history. It must be understood that the mausoleum of books is the true test. This person could not even pass the reflecting monolith. I'm afraid he is also like this. It is truly a pity." They were clearly looking at Chun Chong Sheng, but they were talking to themselves as if Chun Chong Sheng did not exist, or perhaps they did not care about Chun Chong Sheng's reaction. Chun Chong Sheng was silent for a moment. Then he once again sat in front of the monolith. Guan and Moon Nu laughed, turned around, and walked down the mausoleum of books shoulder to shoulder, but their conversation continued. "What kind of person is Su Yurong? How could she marry him? This is the hope of Orthodox Academy's revival. Truly laughable." Whether it was intentional or not, their voices were very clear and constantly transmitted into Chun Chong Sheng's ears. Afterwards, a burst of laughter came from the mountain path. Chun Chong Sheng quietly looked at the monolith, as if he was not affected in the slightest. Spring gradually deepened. In the sky, several hundred snow geese were returning from a distant place. They had come from the warm Great Western region and had crossed the sea to return to Heaven Pillar Peak, where they would spend the long summer. The geese cried, somewhat tired, but still clear and bright. In the forest surrounding the monolith hut, the cries of birds rose up, as if mocking those snow geese for asking for trouble and for being unbearably stupid. Chun Chong Sheng raised his head to look at those two beautiful white lines in the blue sky. He recalled the time when he rode a crane on the mountain behind Xining Village and chased after a flock of snow geese. He began to laugh. "I feel that this chapter was written very well. Of course, tomorrow will be even better. I haven't asked for a monthly vote in quite a few months. Today is the first day of the 11th month, so I very sincerely summon everyone here. I'd like to trouble everyone to give their guaranteed monthly votes to Heaven Seizing Notebook. The reason I dare to ask for monthly votes is because this month I won't be going out for anything. I'm getting restless. I really can't guarantee how many chapters I'll update every day, but I can guarantee that this month's chapters will definitely surpass 150,000 characters. Finally, please allow me to enthusiastically recommend to everyone my good friend and old friend, Katsuji Dashi's new book from the world of creation, Defeating the Invincible. The book number is 433109, and the link is below. Chuangshi. QQ/BK/XH/4333109. HTML. Chapter 226. Suddenly, the chirping of the birds in the forest disappeared without a trace. Perhaps it was because they knew that someone even noisier than them had arrived. Seeing Tang 36 appear in front of the monolith hut, Chun Changsheng felt that it was rather strange. According to the routine of the past few days, this guy should not have been willing to leave the heavenly tone monoliths until it was late in the evening. Do you know who those two people are? Tang 36 looked in the direction of the mountain path and raised his eyebrows slightly. I don't know where they came from. Chun Changsheng thought about his words and said, people who don't know what they are. Tang 36 saw the expression on his face and realized that he really didn't care about the ridicule from the two people. He said angrily, even if they are ignorant people, do you think they don't care? Chun Changsheng said, don't talk about this. Why did you come out? Tang 36 finally remembered what he came here for. He stared into his eyes and said proudly, I saw the third monument. Chun Changsheng was stunned and said, didn't that happen the day before yesterday? Tang 36 was obviously not satisfied with his reaction. He raised his voice and said, the important thing is I am about to break through the state. Chun Changsheng was startled for a second. Then a happy smile appeared on his face. He said sincerely, really? That's great. Tang 36 said helplessly, I'm about to surpass you. Do you understand? I've been waiting for this day. Chun Changsheng's face was filled with joy. He took out a medicine box from his bosom and handed it over to him, saying, inside are instructions on how to take the medicine. Breaking through to the ethereal opening realm is a major event. You can't be careless. Which medicine to take at each step, the dosage to take each time, you must not make any mistakes. Tonight, I will ask Jushio to help keep an eye on it. Inside the box were the pills that Luo asked the priests of the Li Palace to make before the great examination. The pills used were the precious herbs that he and Tang 36 stole from the 100-her garden and the rare herbs that Luo asked her clansmen to prepare. These pills were specifically used to help meditation realm Shioja break through to the ethereal opening realm. In terms of medicinal strength, they wouldn't lose to Scholatry Manor's Rising Heaven pill. Tang 36 was speechless as he held the medicine box. He had wanted to motivate this guy, but how did the conversation end up like this? Suddenly, he thought, with Chun Changsheng's behavior, could it be that he had truly given up on comprehending the monoliths? Thinking of this, his mood instantly became heavy. The atmosphere of spring became increasingly clear, and the flocks of snow geese returning to the capital from the great western continent increased. 20 days had already passed since the 3 grades of this year's grand examination had entered the mausoleum of books. In this period of time, people had successively solved the reflecting monolith. Only Chun Changsheng continued to sit in front of the monolith hut every day. Compared to its initial liveliness, the current monolith hut seemed very deserted. Go Hanshi believed that there really was something wrong with his state of mind. Even Tang 36 and Jushio had begun to lose confidence in him, and the monolith guardians who had always been secretly watching him had already lost interest in him, let alone the other monolith viewers. When they looked at his figure outside the monolith hut, they could not conceal the ridicule on their faces. The situation in the mausoleum of books was accurately transmitted to the capital. The fact that Chun Changsheng still had not succeeded in comprehending the monoliths brought about many different reactions. In the divine general of the East estate, Madame Su threw a rare temper at Su Shiji. She said that the family banquet should have been delayed for a few more days. Su Shiji remained silent and smashed a precious Rue-kiln porcelain cup. The atmosphere in the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education became somewhat oppressive. Every day, Mei Shah would close his eyes and lie down in the room, filled with plum blossoms, as if he was sleeping. However, Priest Xan had already clearly heard the old man mutter to himself several times with slight regret. Did we push him too hard? When Lady Mo was free, she would go to the small building in the Orthodox Academy and lie down on Chun Chongqing's bed for a while. However, as the scent of the clean youth on the pillow and bedding grew fainter and fainter, her mood also grew more and more irritable. When she was helping the Empress read the memorials, she really did harshly reprimand the two prefects. Tian Haisheng Shui's return to Snow Old Pass did not affect the mood of the continent's current number 1 clan. Several manors in the capital continuously held banquets. Scholars and literati walked through them like dogs. The head of the family and several important figures of the Tianhai clan seemed calm, but in reality, they were much more relaxed. Qin Chongqing's inability to comprehend the monoliths caused countless discussions in the capital. People tried to explain the situation, but they felt that it didn't make sense. The head of the Tianhai clan said something in a slightly mocking manner at one of the banquets. In the end, it became the consensus of the majority of people. No matter how bright a diamond is, after such a fierce combustion, other than a few wisps of smoke, what else can be left? You have to know that last year, he burned for an entire year. From the Ivy League gathering to the grand examination, the youth from Xining village had given the continent too many shocks and even miracles. The mausoleum of books had now become a mountain that lay in front of him. No one thought that the youth could continue to create miracles. Everyone thought that he would be like those geniuses that had fallen in history, quietly disappearing. Only one person still had confidence in Qin Chongqing. On the top floor of the Education Palace's Great Hall, Luo Luo stood by the railing, her hand resting on a sunshade. She did not like the false sunlight of this world. Looking into the distance, she could only see the unchanging perfection. She could not see the mausoleum of heavenly harvest in the real world, nor could she see the teacher currently viewing the monoliths within the mausoleum. Teacher has never cared about other people's hopes for him. He only lives for himself. But if you have hopes for him, then when has he ever disappointed you? She turned around and looked at Jin Yulu. Her beautiful little face was filled with trust and pride. I don't know why he still hasn't been able to comprehend the first heavenly tome monolith, but I'm very sure that it's not because he can't comprehend the first monolith, but because of some other reason. If he can succeed, then he will definitely make everyone speechless with shock. As usual, he woke up at 5 in the morning. He quietly opened his eyes, got out of bed, washed his face, and rinsed his mouth. He cooked and swept, then went to the mausoleum of books. The season of the year was in spring, and the season of the day was in the morning. The spring morning was the most beautiful time, only it was slightly cold. Qin Chongqing tightened his collar and sat down outside the monolith hut. He had already sat here for many days. Aside from occasionally going under the eaves to take shelter from the rain or the scorching sun, he had never moved. There was not a speck of dust on the limestone beneath him, and it had even become somewhat smooth. He had read the notebook left behind by his son many times, and had long since memorized it by heart. The monolith inscriptions on the heavenly tome monoliths, those complicated lines, had long since been deeply engraved in his sea of consciousness. Although he did not have enough time to completely understand the changes of the monolith inscriptions during the 4 seasons, he had already grasped the daily changes. As a result, he did not need to look at anything else, and directly closed his eyes. There was the sound of footsteps hurriedly passing by in the distance. There was also the sound of footsteps slowly passing by in front of him. There was the sound of suppressed voices discussing on a mountain path, and deliberately loud, mocking words resounded in his ears. Afterwards, those voices slowly disappeared, leaving behind only silence and the chirping of the birds in the forest. The chirping of the birds in the forest suddenly became more concentrated, and then from high up in the sky came the cries of geese, one of which was especially clear. Chen Changsheng opened his eyes and gazed up at the azure sky. From the east, he saw a flock of snow geese. He did not know how many batches of snow geese had returned to the capital. There was so much snow in the spring sky, and it was truly very beautiful. He thought to himself, that clear cry of a goose must have come from a young goose, or perhaps it was its first time on such a long journey. The snow geese continued to fly into the distance. They might stay in the capital for a few days and then continue west. That's all I can do. Chen Changsheng stood up and said this somewhat regretfully, and then walked into the monolith hut. Looking at the ice-cold monolith, and those lines that he had already grown tired of, he shook his head. He thought to himself that his aptitude was indeed still not enough. Sun Mei's notebook had brought great benefits to him, as well as the other youths in the grass hut, in their comprehension of the monoliths. For example, Guan Fei Bai and the others to be able to comprehend the monoliths so smoothly was because they had approached the wisdom of their predecessors from the notebook, and thus obtained some sort of inspiration. The benefit that Chen Changsheng had gained was that he now had many more things to refer to. In the notebook, Sun Mei had left behind many different ways of comprehending the monoliths. Just the reflecting monolith alone had over 10 different ways. However, the first sentence in Wang Jisu's notebook that he had found in the pavilion of ascending mist said that positions were relative. So what Chen Changsheng wanted to do was not to comprehend the monoliths according to those ways of thinking, but rather to avoid those ways of thinking and open up a completely new path. Through observing the natural changes of the monolith inscriptions between heaven and earth, he would be able to find an answer that completely belonged to him. He wanted to comprehend the monoliths in this way. This way of thinking was extremely likely to be correct, but to his requirements, it was still rather incomplete or perhaps not pure enough. It was still a variation of the three most mainstream and most orthodox methods of comprehending the monoliths. Or perhaps it could be said that this method of comprehending the monoliths was still not completely free from the influence of these fixed ways of thinking. He was somewhat dissatisfied with this, so he bitterly pondered for over 20 days. Regretfully, he still did not succeed. More importantly, just as he had said to Go Hanshi before, he cultivated in following his heart. He always felt that this method of comprehending the monoliths, and even the methods used by countless experts and saints in the past, were all wrong. He always felt that this mausoleum of books and these monoliths should have a deeper meaning, and that was what he truly wanted to see. It was truly regretful that he did not have any more time. That clear and bright cry of a goose woke him up. Time passed really quickly. In the blink of an eye, there were only a few days left until the opening of the Garden of Zhou. On the first day he entered the Mausoleum of Books, Go Hanshi had asked him if he wanted to go to the Garden of Zhou, or if he wanted to stay in the Mausoleum of Books a little longer. He had said that he would think about it when the time came. In the past few days, he had already thought about what he would choose. If he could not defy the heavens and change his fate, or cultivate to the concealed divinity realm, then he only had 5 years left to live. Of course, he had to go to more places, see more scenery, and get to know more people. He wanted to go to the Garden of Zhou. Then, he had to start comprehending the monoliths. Thus, he began to comprehend the monoliths. He raised his right hand, pointed at a certain place on the monolith, and said, "This is the character for home." At this moment, the sky was clear and bright. Among the incomparably complex lines on the monolith, there were a few lines that were slightly shallower. Under the light, they seemed to float and faintly seemed to be words. Then he pointed at another part of the monolith and said, "This is the character for river." Immediately after, without any pause, he looked at the area on the top of the monolith that absolutely no one would be able to see the words on, and said, "Light, smoke, illumination, eaves, autumn, clump." In the blink of an eye, he said 28 words without any pause. These were all words on the monolith. The last word was light. His voice was very clear, just like the cry of the goose from before. Towards the unknown world, there was no fear, only expectation, and only confidence. Then a cool breeze arose. He disappeared from in front of the monolith. Cool, there will be a next chapter, but it will definitely be very late. Friends who sleep early need not wait.